Hey there, welcome back to Bedtime Chills. Tonight, enjoy 3 hours of terrifying horror stories with rain and light thunder. If these tales send chills down your spine, hit that like button and tell me what time you're listening and where you're tuning in from in the comments. Your support helps keep the chills coming. Now, get comfy and let's dive into the darkness. I'm a former police officer. There's one call my partner and I took that I'll never forget. I'm Jay Miles, and I want to share with you a story that stuck with me for years. I joined the force many decades ago. It was my redemptive way of giving back to society. When I was younger, in my mid-20s, I committed petty crimes in a desperate attempt to fit in. The culture at the time admired bad boys, and having a record was cool to most people. I grew out of that. I was partnerless for some of the 911 calls I responded to, and I'm just thankful to whatever being exists out there that I had a partner for this call in particular. Our police cruiser was parked in a dark alleyway, tucked between its brick walls to catch speeding drivers. It was around 1 a.m. when we received the dispatch. Someone called about a woman walking the streets barefoot with her baby, murmuring things to herself. That's all we were told. We arrived at the scene. My partner, Rob, and I were on edge the moment we got there, not least because Cinder Valley was a notoriously bad neighborhood. After circling the area a few times, the woman was nowhere to be found, so we decided to park the cruiser and knock on some doors. The 911 caller was anonymous, so we weren't able to speak with them directly. Most folks were asleep at that hour, and we had to settle for whoever happened to be walking the streets that night. "You see that?" said Rob. "Someone disappeared behind a wooden gate by a house, and we just missed them." Rob and I jogged over to see if we could get to this person, our possible suspect. I could see folks in their homes peeking through curtains, staring curiously at two cops running around in their neighborhood. It looked like the suspect entered someone's backyard through an open gate, so we flipped on our flashlights and followed. The backyard was pitch black, and we couldn't see anything that wasn't within the narrow beams of our flashlights. I noticed my partner's light was shaking mildly. "You okay?" I asked him. "I'm fine." "It's okay to be scared, man," I said, chuckling. "Get lost." A rusty swing set moved in the wind, and the trees around us rustled their leaves. My body shivered, not from the cold breeze, but from the atmosphere. If I was unsettled, I could only imagine how much more my partner was. "Excuse me, sir." The homeowner suddenly opened her backyard door. "Sorry, ma'am," I said. "We'll be off your property in no time." "Didn't mean to scare you. My partner and I are looking for a woman who was reported." "Officer, I can't hear too well. Would you mind coming inside?" I went inside to speak with the homeowner while Rob continued searching the backyard. I explained that we were looking for a woman who was behaving strangely and walking around the neighborhood with a baby in hand. While talking with the homeowner, Rob screamed from outside. "You okay? What happened?" I asked. It looked as if he had witnessed a ghost appear before his very eyes, then vanish into thin air. "I saw her." "The woman? What did she look like?" "She." "Come on, Rob. Talk." He took a moment and caught his breath, his hand over his heart. "She ran up the wall. Right in front of me. She ran up that wall, Jay, like an animal." He pointed at the 2-story house. I didn't know what to make of that. Rob didn't have a history of mental illness that I was aware of, and he certainly wasn't on substances. I knew him, and I'd known him for a comfortable amount of time to be able to say with confidence that he would never make things up, especially when it was serious, like police work. "Well," I began awkwardly, "did you see which way she went?" "After she climbed the wall." "The bushes over that metal gate there," he said, flashing his light at it. I saw them moving. With our guns drawn, we hopped over the gate and searched the next-door neighbor's property. "Wait," said Rob. "I heard you call for backup. Shouldn't we wait for them?" "No. We can do this, just us two." This backyard was even bigger than the other, but it was just as dark. We aimed our flashlights at a wooden shed sitting at the corner of the yard, and before we took another step toward it, we heard someone crying. It sounded like a baby. "Police." I knocked down the door of the shed, and we cleared the inside. The woman was not there. But there was a baby. A plastic one. Rob pointed his light on the ground of the shed. "The hell is this?" A mechanical baby doll that could play recorded sounds, placed there by someone for the purpose of luring people, was not something that sat right with me. Not a moment after that, our ears rang out a blood-curdling, high-pitched scream coming from the first house whose backyard we searched. As I dashed back to the other house, I noticed Rob wasn't following. He wasn't even moving. "Let's go. What the hell are you doing?" I yelled. Rob's eyes widened as he glared at me, his mouth agape. I can't. I just can't, Jay." "Sorry." I didn't have time to argue with him, so I continued on, hopped over the gate, and entered the old woman's house. "What's wrong?" I asked her. I saw her. She was right there. The old woman pointed outside to her backyard at a spot on the ground just by the glass door. She was just there, just standing and looking at me. And I think she smiled. Okay, which way did she? Another scream. Rob's. By the time I made it back over to the shed, Rob was nowhere to be found. The plastic baby was gone too. I called out for him and looked everywhere, but he was simply gone. You know, it was like this mysterious woman could smell fear. It's something she seemed to prey on, and Rob had plenty of it that night. When backup finally arrived, I explained to my higher-ups at least a few hundred times what had transpired. This all took place decades ago, and Rob hasn't been found since. It's a cold case. When I think back on this night, it shivers my spine like nothing else. That mysterious woman, she was playing a game with the two of us, and it feels like she won from experience. I'm not even sure why I'm still referring to her as a woman, as a human being. Because if Rob's description of her is any indication, she was something else. A full year passed by, and I went through different partners. I was stationed in the same city, and sometimes my new partner John and I had to report to calls that came from Cinder Valley. Eventually, I almost forgot about it all. But I never forgot Rob, wherever he was. Dead or alive. That didn't last long. One night, while sitting in our cruiser, John and I received a dispatch. It seemed like another ordinary call until the operator mentioned something about a woman talking to herself on the street with a crying baby in hand. I found a hidden door in my cellar, and I think I've made a big mistake. My wife and I have lived in our house for around 5 years, and in that time, we've probably been down into the cellar a handful of times. Our house is an old Victorian terrace, and so the cellar is cold and damp. When we first moved in, we kept wine and other things down there because my wife liked the idea of telling people we had a wine cellar, but it got annoying going down there every time, so we stopped using it. There's only the two of us living here, so we never really needed to use it for storage space. A few weeks ago, we decided we were going to renovate it, maybe turn it into a mini gym or something. So, at the weekend, we went down and began cleaning it up. The cellar has a stone floor, but the walls were covered in this horrible, yellowed floral wallpaper. It looked old as hell, and I assumed it was put up decades ago. So, We began to strip the wallpaper. And that's when we found the door. Covered up with wallpaper, the door was set into the wall. It was plain wood, and the door handle had been removed so that it was flat. We were pretty stumped at how we hadn't noticed this before, how it had blended in so well with the rest of the wall. But at this point, I was pretty excited that we found a secret door, so I largely overlooked its oddness. All the houses on our street have cellars, so I assumed it must be an old doorway leading through to the next door neighbor's cellar. We decided that we'd go around to our neighbors tomorrow morning and tell them about the doorway, suggesting we brick it up or something. I didn't really feel comfortable about having this access point into our house. My wife tried to look through the small circle hole in the door where the handle had been removed, but it was pitch black in there. So, because we're nosy, we used the torch on our phone to peek through the hole. My wife looked first. She suddenly went still. "This doesn't go into the next door neighbor's cellar," she said slowly, moving back from the door. I frowned and took her phone, looking for myself. Instead of the cellar, there were stone steps leading downwards. I couldn't see very far with the light from the phone, so I brought down my big torch and managed to get the door open. We looked down the stairs with the torch. They weren't very long, and at the end of the stairway was another door. This one looked really old, wooden panels kept together with metal columns. It even had one of those metal ring handles. It didn't make sense how this could be here. Even though it was going down, the beginning of the stairway would still cut into the next door neighbor's cellar. We'd been in his cellar for drinks a few times, which had been done up into a games room with a bar and pool table, and I had never noticed a big jut out from the wall that would cover a stairway, or that it was smaller than our cellar if there was a whole wall blocking it off. My wife thought we should probably talk with him before going down and left, but I was too curious about the whole thing. So, I took the torch and went down. I tried the handle, and it was a bit stiff, but I was completely surprised that it opened. I shone the torch inside. It was a concrete room, similar to our cellar, but smaller, and this was the only entrance or exit that I could see. I waved the torch around and nearly jumped out of my skin. There was a man standing at the back wall, facing the wall, his back to me. He was completely still, wearing a black suit and a black-rimmed hat. The man was so still that I began to think he might be a mannequin until he slowly lifted one foot. I stood transfixed, my torchlight trained on him. It was just bright enough to illuminate his body, but the rest of the room was in complete darkness. He held his foot still in the air before slowly moving it a step backward. His movements were unnatural and jerky, like someone who didn't fully understand how to walk. He stayed like that for a moment, completely still, one foot placed back. Then he lifted his other foot in the same jerky movement. This time, when he stepped back, his foot slammed on the floor. The sound shook me out of my frozen state, and I jumped back. As soon as I moved, it was like I'd triggered something, and suddenly he moved so quickly. He was running backward toward me, his legs jerking around unnaturally. Writing this down, it sounds kind of funny, but at the time, it was utterly terrifying. I'd never seen anyone move that way before. I instinctively threw the torch at him. Maybe I thought I could knock him out or something. I honestly don't know, and ran back up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind me and running up the stairs leading out of the cellar, slamming that door shut too. I hesitated by the door, barricading it with my arm, trying to control my breathing and understand what I just witnessed. I heard the sound of the door push open in the cellar, and then what sounded like a huge lump of flesh dragging along the floor. I thought I began to hear what sounded like a low hissing noise, at which point I ran out of the house, yelling my wife's name. She was standing on the front step of the neighbors, talking to him. I grabbed her and pulled her to the other side of the road, yelling for my neighbor to get away from the house. Without waiting to explain to them what I saw, I grabbed my phone and called the police. We all stood there in the dark, my neighbor in his robe and slippers, looking at the house. After a few moments, I saw the lights that we'd left on flicker through our kitchen window. And then they went out completely. All I remember was holding my wife's hand so tightly, looking up into our dark windows, and waiting for the police to arrive. They found no one in the house, but the cellar door was open, and so was our back door. They checked our garden but found no one, and no footprints or signs of someone being there. They brought a team over to check out the hidden room we found. My neighbor claimed no knowledge of the room and that he too couldn't understand how the stairs and room could possibly exist, could fit in between our two cellars. The police couldn't explain it any more than we could. I didn't want to ever go back in there, so they showed us photos of the walls inside that room. The concrete was carved with symbols, and they found what looked like centuries-old dried blood. They had the symbols sent to our local university's history department, but no one knew what they meant. They sealed off the room, and we've never gone down into the cellar again. I think we made a huge mistake that day in opening that door and going into that room. I think we set something free that day, something that someone had locked up for a reason, and I don't think it's good. An old man's last secret. My grandfather is 95 years old and not long for this world. There's nothing but a mess of tubes and wires to tether him here with us. It's difficult for him to speak, but each rasping whisper carries a severe weight that cannot be interrupted. My family doesn't talk about things like death though, so whenever I visit with my dad, we tend to spend most of the time sitting in near silence. What a news week, huh? My dad might say. Grandfather will grunt. Crazy world. Then silence again. Small talk seems almost disrespectful to the gravity of the situation, but no one wants to be the first to broach the irrevocable goodbye. When the silence gets too loud, my dad will start to fidget with his phone or pull out a book until one of us makes an excuse to leave. That's how it went yesterday, with my father mumbling something about a dentist appointment and hurrying out the door almost as soon as we arrived. "You'll stay though, won't you?" my grandfather said when we were alone in the room together. You listen to an old man's last secret. This was it then. The end of the road was in sight. "Would you like me to call Dad back?" I asked. Grandfather shook his head as far as the oxygen tubes would allow it to turn. I'd rather he didn't know. I already knew some of the story he told me. It began when my grandfather was 20 years old, living in Nazi Germany. He'd been working forced labor on a farm, but managed to smuggle my grandmother and infant father out of the country hidden in a grain shipment. He'd been caught almost immediately and sent to the concentration camp at Buchenwald, where he endured the next 2 years until he was liberated by Allied forces. "You don't have to tell me what happened there if you don't want to," I told him. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the gruesome details. He was unusually animated and persistent though, promising it was something that needed to be said. He wouldn't have survived the ordeal if it hadn't been for a friend he'd met there. One of the Nazi officers, a Rottenführer squad leader, had taken a special interest in him because of their striking similarity in age and appearance. The two would sit on either side of a barbed wire fence and swap stories about their childhoods. My grandfather would talk about my grandmother, how beautiful she was, and how he wouldn't give up until he found her again. The SS officer had gone straight from the Hitlerjugend, Hitler Youth Group, to the army and had never been intimate with a woman. He became enraptured in my grandfather's tales of romance, and the two became close friends despite the circumstances. The officer twice spared my grandfather's name from work assignments that meant certain death, and he often slipped extra rations through the fence, which my grandfather would then distribute to other prisoners. It wasn't a good life, but it was life, and that was good, grandfather said. Things changed as the war began drawing to a close. The Nazi officers became increasingly paranoid and desperate as the Allied forces moved in. It became common practice for lower-ranking officers to be held as scapegoats when impossible work orders were not met. Besides that, the rumor that the rotten Führer was protecting my grandfather put him in a dire position with his own officers. Faced with protecting my grandfather and his own hide, the rotten Führer signed the order for my grandfather to be sent to a nearby armaments factory. 18-hour workdays, starvation rations, no medical attention, the factory might as well have been a death sentence. The 3-month survival rate was less than 50%. In the name of love, my grandfather pleaded, let him survive to find her again. She was waiting for him in America. The rotten Führer was moved, but his decision was final. His only compromise was to record the address of where she went and send her a letter to let her know what happened to him. So how did you survive? I asked. Did he change his mind? Were you rescued from the factory? Shielded from the worst of the camp by the rotten Führer, the transition to the factory proved too difficult for the young farmer. He didn't last the first week. What do you mean, didn't last? How'd you get out? The exertion of the long story was taking its toll on my grandfather. He coughed and wheezed, struggling to draw breath for several seconds before clearing his throat a final time. On April 11, 1945, the Buchenwald camp was liberated. Many of the Nazis had already abandoned their positions and fled into the country. Others decided to lock themselves inside, pretending to be prisoners themselves so the Allied forces would have mercy on them. This was especially convincing for those who had taken the time to get to know the prisoners and could assume their identities. When the SS officer gave the information and address of his lost love, he was allowed to board the next transport ship returning to America to be reunited with her. The gears in my head were turning, and then stopped. Your grandmother was suspicious at first when I met her, but she accepted that the war had changed me. Besides, I knew so many stories about her that she couldn't deny our shared history. I raised his boy as my own and lived the life he dreamed of every night until his death. Do you think your real grandfather would forgive me if he knew? I didn't have an answer for him then, and I didn't get another chance. He died in his sleep that night after a long and happy life that wasn't his. I thought my apartment was haunted. The truth is so much worse. In retrospect, it should have been obvious from the start that something was going on. It was my first time renting an apartment, but even I thought the landlord was too eager for me to move in as soon as possible. The rent was ridiculously low for the area, the apartment itself was in pristine condition, and the whole process, from touring the apartment to moving in, only took about a week. Nothing like that comes without a catch. Apartment 311 was a pleasant place to live at first. It had 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, and since I lived alone, I got to convert 1 bedroom into my own office space. It came with a handful of paintings already, so it didn't even have that off-putting, liminal feeling some empty apartments have. The only immediate downside I noticed was a slight smell in the living room from time to time. It wasn't anything too noticeable, but occasionally you'd catch a faint whiff of a musty odor. I lived in apartment 311 for a couple of weeks before I noticed anything was wrong. It started with simple things, like various knickknacks being placed on the wrong shelves, snacks and small objects going missing, or the fridge being left open. These incidents always happened while I was asleep, making me feel like I was going crazy. There was no way someone could be breaking into my apartment just to steal useless crap and rearrange collectibles. The door was always locked before I went to bed, and even if someone had a key, I always bolted the door as well. I considered setting up security cameras, but when I looked into the cost, I balked. Though the apartment was cheap, between rent and utilities, I couldn't afford an entire security system. I tried putting it out of my mind, assuming I might be sleepwalking or grabbing a midnight snack and forgetting by morning. I'd never been an easy sleeper. I was prone to night terrors and disturbances, which had only worsened in this unfamiliar environment. The worst sleep problem I've ever experienced is sleep paralysis. It used to happen rarely, maybe once every 2 or 3 months, but after moving into the apartment, it became almost a weekly occurrence. Typically, my sleep paralysis was mild. I'd find myself unable to move, eyes open, struggling to breathe. Sometimes, I'd sense a presence in the room with me, but before I moved, I had never experienced hallucinations. That changed around the time the food and objects started disappearing. One night, as usual, I felt like I'd woken up but couldn't move a muscle. It was hard to breathe, and I had that awful feeling of not being alone. I tried calming myself, reminding myself that I'd been through this before, but something felt different. Then, I noticed the door to my bedroom slowly opening, inch by inch. The creak of the hinges echoed as it swung inward. Someone, or something, was coming into my room. First, he peeked his head around the door. His dull eyes reflected the faint glow of moonlight from my window. He was bald, with pale, flaky skin. I wanted to scream, but I was still a prisoner of my own body. His expression froze me with terror, a rictus grin, his chipped yellow teeth clenched tightly and grinding together. I watched in horror as the rest of his body passed into the room, tiptoeing like a cartoon character sneaking up on someone. He was skeletal, emaciated, and covered in sores. He was stark naked, smeared in dirt and filth. As he crept closer, his hot breath hit my face, carrying that same musty odor from the living room. His expression never changed. He didn't blink, but I felt hatred radiating from him like heat from a furnace. He just stood there, staring at me for what felt like hours. Finally, he turned and tiptoed back out, gently shutting the door behind him. A few minutes later, my body began to wake up, and I could move again. The next day, I called in sick. There was no way I could get any work done after what I'd experienced. I spent an hour searching every room, closet, and corner, convinced someone was hiding. When I found nothing, I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination and that I was safe. Things stayed the same after that. Objects continued disappearing, the smell in the living room lingered, and the sleep paralysis incidents persisted, now featuring my unwelcome visitor. To lessen my fear, I gave him a silly name, Jimmy. Somehow, naming that horrifying face helped reduce the terror, even just a little. As far as sleep paralysis hallucinations went, Jimmy wasn't too bad once I started to get used to him. He never touched me or sat on my chest like some people's nightmares did. He just stood and stared. It was still deeply unpleasant, mind you, but I felt lucky that it was a consistent kind of unpleasantness at least. Then I found the photograph. I noticed it underneath a pile of papers while I was cleaning up, a picture of 2 women embracing in front of a waterfall. I didn't recognize either of the women and assumed it must have been from the previous tenant. I texted the landlord, Greg, and asked if he still had the old tenant's phone number so I could give her a call. He obliged, and within a few minutes, I was calling her. She picked up after a couple of rings, sounding slightly exasperated. "Hello, this is Rebecca." "Who is this?" "Hi, my name is Flora. I'm the current tenant of apartment 311. I think you may have left a photograph behind when you moved. I was wondering if you'd want to pick it up or if I could mail it to you or something." There was a long pause on the other end of the phone. "Hello?" I asked. "You need to get out of that apartment. You're not safe." I honestly didn't have any response but to laugh. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked her between chuckles. I heard her sigh with frustration. "It's not a joke. I'm serious. Things have been going missing, right?" That got my attention. "How do you know that?" "It happened with me too. My girlfriend and I kept noticing things being moved or disappearing while we were asleep. Little things mostly, snacks, trinkets, nothing major. Now, I never saw this, but my girlfriend swears that one time, when she got up in the middle of the night to get a glass of water, she saw this naked man just staring at her. He was covered in sores and looked more like a corpse than a person. She woke me up, and we called the police, of course, but they didn't find anything. I think. Rebecca paused for a moment, choosing her words. What? What is it? I asked, increasingly panicked. I began to worry that Jimmy was more than just a simple hallucination. I think 311 is haunted. We asked around to some of the other residents, and apparently, the last guy to live there just disappeared. Our best guess is that he must have died, and his spirit just never left. My girlfriend is into some occult stuff, so she tried a cleansing ritual or something like that, but it didn't work. Things kept disappearing, and eventually, we just decided to move. I hung up the phone. It was rude, sure, but I was just so shocked that I didn't know what to do. At the very least, I began to understand why I got this apartment so cheap. I found myself just sitting on the couch for a while, occasionally getting a whiff of the musty smell. I stared blankly at a painting on the wall, one of the ones that was already there when I first moved in. It depicted a woman in a white dress sitting underneath a tree, reading a book. I couldn't tell what was making me so focused on it. It seemed utterly unrelated to what was happening. Eventually, I snapped out of it and went into my office to do some research. After a little digging, I found some information regarding the tenant who lived here before Rebecca, the one who disappeared. Apparently, one of his coworkers put out a missing persons report 6 months ago. His name was Michael Hansen, and I gasped when I saw a photograph of him. He looked exactly like Jimmy, albeit not so emaciated and filthy. I hastily packed some of my things and made arrangements to stay at a friend's house for a couple of nights, telling them that my apartment had a roach problem and the landlord needed to fumigate it. I called into work and gave them some sob story about an uncle dying, enough to get time off for a few days. With no more distractions from the ghost of Michael Hansen, I slept soundly on my friend's couch, unbothered by any sleep paralysis. The next 2 days were spent researching. I checked out dozens of books on folklore and the occult from the local library, scoured paranormal internet forums, and even watched a few episodes of some cheesy ghost hunting TV show. I was determined to figure out a way to put the spirit of Michael Hansen to rest. The stories were all wildly different, with countless potential solutions to my problem. Some sources said salt was a surefire way to banish spirits, others said iron was a good ghost repellent, but most simply said I should give up and move. However, one myth piqued my interest. According to some beliefs, the spirits of the unquiet dead could be tied to objects from their life, binding them to the place where the object resided. If the object to which their soul was bound was destroyed, it freed their spirit, and they could move on to the afterlife. I remembered the paintings. I had assumed they were put there by the landlord, but it was just as possible that they were left behind by Michael. I arrived back at the apartment, determined to grab the paintings and burn them, laying Michael Hansen's soul to rest once and for all. I felt like some sort of hero, a badass monster hunter who saved the day with her intuition and a little bit of book smarts. One by one, I pulled the paintings off the walls, putting them in a cardboard box. I made a mental note to buy some lighter fluid on the way to the empty lot where I planned to burn them. I approached the final painting, the one that showed a woman in a white dress beneath a tree. I pulled it off the wall and recoiled as the musty smell increased in intensity. Staring in confusion, I saw a small rectangular hole where the painting used to be, about 4 feet off the ground and 2 feet by 2 feet in length and width. I shuddered in fear, remembering that Michael's body was never found. Perhaps he was murdered, his corpse hidden in the walls by some unknown assailant? I nervously flicked on my flashlight, peered within the hole, and screamed. I ran out of apartment 311 as fast as I could before calling the police, sobbing with terror. I had been prepared to find a body, maybe cut up into little pieces and wrapped in duct tape. I was ready for death and decay and rot. There is something fascinating about ghosts, something somehow romantic about the notion that part of someone could live on even after death. There was nothing romantic about seeing the clenched-toothed grimace of Michael Hansen glaring at me with hate as he stood in the small section of hollow wall where he had been living for the past 6 months. A message to my grandson. Hey Charlie. Well, honey, we need to talk. First, I need to say, I've loved having you here with me all these years. It's a shame, but I bet you can hardly remember your mom and dad anymore. You were only 6 when your mom died, and I've done my best to fill her shoes, but I know it's not the same. I'll never forget getting the news of the car accident. Do you remember the time before, when we all lived here together? Probably not, but in case you've ever wondered, your mom and dad were crazy about each other. The house was always filled with warmth, laughter, and love. I know you were really sad that your dad left, but I think it was too hard for him to stay here without your mom. He faded after the accident. He did keep in touch for a little while, but that fizzled out. I don't know where he is now, but I hope he's found happiness. I hope you know that his leaving wasn't your fault. You were the apple of your dad's eye. I remember coming in the day after he left, and you had yourself quite a tantrum and made quite a mess throwing things around. It's been a long time since you did anything like that, though. You're a good boy, Charlie, and very thoughtful. Running baths for me when I'm tired and putting the kettle on for my coffee when I wake up in the morning. I have a sneaking suspicion the only reason I haven't burnt the house down leaving the stove on is you. I know I'm a bit forgetful now, and it's been nice to know you're here to help me. All the little things you do mean a lot. I'm proud of you. Never forget that. Thing of it is though, I've had some bad news. I went to see Dr. Jones the other day, and he reckons I've got a few months left at best. Don't worry though, I'm not in any pain and it's going to be peaceful. I'm an old woman now, and I've made my peace with the world. I'm tired now and I'm ready to rest. My biggest concern though is what will happen to you. I'm not sure why you've stayed so long, if I'm honest. I wonder if maybe it's because you were so young when you lost your mom. Maybe you've never been sure what to do next. Maybe that's why you stayed safe with your old grandma. When I go, the house will have to be sold, and obviously, the new people won't want you here. I gotta be honest, Charlie, it's made my sciatica play up something chronic worrying about that. I know you'll be worried about what's going to happen to Felix, but don't. Patty along the road has said she'd be glad to take him in. She's quite happy to have another cat, and Felix plays with her moggas out back all the time anyway. He'll be home from home. I've thought long and hard about this, and I think I might have come up with a solution. You have to know, I'm doing this because I love you. I'm going to leave this on my screen for you to read, and I'm posting it on this sub because I know you read it. You think I haven't noticed you scrolling up when I read too slow, don't you? Your grandma's not that daft yet. So anyway, this afternoon Father Brogan is coming round. I don't know if you remember him, but he came out after the accident to arrange the funerals. He's very nice and he's going to cleanse the house or bless it or something. I'm not sure of the details. He assures me it won't hurt you, but I think it's probably best if you don't fight it. Please don't worry about anything. You'll be with your mom and dad before you know it, and I'll be with you soon. All my love. Grandma. I am not a social man, and I have had few friends in my life. Sal, the bartender at my favorite pub, was one of the select few in my inner circle. I know what you're thinking. He's a bartender, so he has to be friendly to get a good tip. You're wrong, it goes beyond that. I'd known Sal for over 25 years and sat across from him at the bar almost every day since we met. When I got married, Sal was my best man. When my wife threw me out, it was at Sal's home that I stayed. When she took full custody of my daughter, it was Sal who consoled me. He was a good friend, always willing to listen to me and give me advice, like any bartender would. Unlike the others, however, Sal actually cared. Sal was a very private man with a rather quiet demeanor. That said, on the few occasions where he chose to let loose, he talked a lot. Sal had a way of capturing the attention of everyone in the room. This might sound a bit cliched, but he'd regale us with stories of his youth, cross-country trips, overseas adventures, mishaps, and entertaining anecdotes. When he spoke, his audience sat on the edges of their seats, hanging on his every word as he gave them juicy details of his endless tales. He was old now and couldn't travel quite as often. He didn't seem to mind. He always had a smile on his face and a cheerful attitude that brightened the mood of everyone he came across. One evening, as I was enjoying a drink, I noticed a man in a booth staring at Sal from across the room. From my angle, I could barely make out his short, spiky raven hair. I pointed him out to Sal, and he told me the man had been coming in every night that week, never ordering anything. Sal, being the big softy that he was, couldn't bring himself to kick the guy out. Considering I went to the pub every night, I was surprised I hadn't seen the stranger until that evening. I was probably too drunk to notice. Later that night, after drinking one too many drinks, as I tended to do all too often, according to my ex-wife, I passed out across a row of chairs. Sal trusted me enough to leave me there, even after closing time. I woke up long before dawn and made my way through the dimly lit bar to the back door, which could only be opened from the inside. This wasn't my first time taking a snooze alone in the bar, so I knew my way around well enough not to run into any of the tables on my way out. As I opened the door to the back alley, I heard what sounded like applause, but it turned out to be the sound of 36 crows taking flight. They hovered above the cold alleyway for a few moments, then landed on and around the leaky dumpster in the front. I jumped when I saw the damn birds. I'm not afraid of crows, mind you. I even feed the ones at work during lunch. They startle me, is all. A hunter's moon peeked through the clouds and illuminated the scene. There was someone standing on the other side of the dumpster, in the forest of crows. It was the man I had seen earlier that night. He had his back turned to me, wearing a black trench coat and boots laced with multiple buckles. There was a large crow perched on his shoulder. Something was odd about his back. A bulky mass moved under his coat, causing it to shift around like curtains in the breeze. The dumpster smelled particularly putrid tonight, I thought. I glanced at the stranger, who stood between me and the street. I moved toward him and saw that his crow was chewing on something. At first, I thought it was a gummy worm, but as I approached, I realized it was much darker and oozed crimson blood onto the cold, wet pavement. Then, I saw Sal. He lay on the ground, his body ripped open, serving as a buffet for the hungry crows to feast on. They pecked at his innards, taking turns chewing on his softer organs. I could hear the crunching sounds as they broke apart his bones with their abnormally strong beaks. Bringing a hand to my mouth, I emitted an audible gasp. The sound caught the stranger's attention, and he slowly turned to face me. His golden, serpentine eyes reminded me of headlights. Something in his left hand gleamed in the moonlight. It was a short silver dagger, the edge covered in liquid that belonged in my friend's veins. I should have been terrified, angry, sad, but I felt strangely calm. My eyes were transfixed on the surreal scene and the man at the center of it all. Though he held a weapon, and though he had used that weapon to murder my friend, I did not feel as though I was in any danger. The man gave me the quiet smile of a Grecian statue, projecting calmness despite the feeding frenzy at his feet. His footsteps echoed down the narrow alley as he made his way toward me. My heart thumped hard in my chest. Paralyzed with fear or disbelief, I watched him outstretch a hand to my face with a gentle elegance seldom attributed to the male gender. The crow on his shoulder tilted its head as its master scraped his long black nails against my cheek. I felt a faint stinging sensation, no worse than that of a paper cut. The man gave me an amused hum as he brought his fingers to his mouth and tasted a few drops of my blood. I'm not sure how long it took me to snap out of the shock, but when I finally did, I looked towards Sal's final resting place and saw that there was nothing left of my old friend, not even a drop of blood. The stranger turned his back to me, and a sudden flood of adrenaline compelled me to grab a wooden plank from the floor. I threw myself toward the man, but stopped suddenly when his trench coat slid off. Two massive black wings clutched to his back like climbing vines. Black veins led to and from the appendages, which flared out with a sound similar to that of an unfurling sail. The man gave me one final look and spoke to me in a deep, booming voice. "You'll thank me one day," he said. With that, the crows took flight, and the man disappeared. I was left alone in the alleyway as the sun rose, no evidence of the man, his crows, or my dead friend. I tried going to the cops, but what could I tell them? I sat in front of the police station, going over the facts in my mind. They'd never believe that some sort of crow demon and his army of minions ate Sal. I ultimately chose inaction, hoping I merely suffered a substance-induced nightmare. It was no nightmare. Sal was reported missing by the pub's owner a few days later. An investigation began, and what the police uncovered shocked even me, who had seen a guy get eaten by a flock of crows. They found evidence linking Sal to no less than 15 cases of missing children. He had kept trophies of their remains hidden in a safe under his bed. Then it hit me, the reason for Sal's frequent trips in his youth. He'd been doing the wretched deed far from home so he wouldn't get caught. This may sound weird, but I am still grateful for Sal's friendship. As I explained earlier, I'm not a very social man. When you get to be over 20, it becomes a lot harder to meet people outside of work, and the friends you do have tend to drift away. Sal helped me through tough times, and I'll always be thankful for his friendship. I still mourn him, not the bad parts. I mourn the loss of the man I thought he was. It may seem strange to you, but that's how I feel. These days, I've stopped drinking. I haven't set foot in that pub since the day Sal died. My ex and I even got back together. I get to see my kid every day, and that is the greatest gift of all. I guess, in a way, losing Sal was one of the best things that ever happened to me. On my way home from work yesterday, I saw a crow with familiar snake eyes gleaming like headlights. He gave me a knowing nod, and I knew we understood one another. Among the horrific things found in Sal's home, they had retrieved a fully packed duffel bag, a single one-way ticket to Mexico for the day after he was killed, and hundreds of photos of my wife and daughter. The crow man saved them. And that, my friends, is why I smiled at that crow and uttered two simple words: thank you. Life hack: the man you can only see when your eyes are closed. Hey, so you know how, when you close your eyes, sometimes you can see the outline of a man in the distance? You might think it's one of those squiggles, except it stays at a fixed point even when you move your head. If you focus on it, it definitely looks like the cutout of a guy standing with his hands hanging down at his sides. Okay, so I found out through experiments that it's possible to get him to move when you're watching him. I say watching because your eyes are closed. Here's how it works. Keep your eyes closed and really focus on him. Imagine your closed eye vision is like a camera, and it can zoom in on him. If you do this for a minute, sometimes even less, you'll find that you can float around your vision and get closer to him. When you get close, like your gaze is floating a few feet away, you'll notice that his fingertips are kind of pointy, and it's hard to tell if he's facing you or facing away. I definitely think he's facing you. If you keep watching him, it will start to feel like he's watching back. It'll make you really nervous at first, but stay calm. You'll feel the base of your neck getting warm and uncomfortable, but you have to keep staring. Do not stop staring. My friend said he broke concentration once when he did this, and when he opened his eyes for a second, he could see the guy right there in the room with him. He said the guy's eyes were huge, like he was screaming, even though he was smiling with his lips pressed so tight they were white. It really freaked my friend out and ruined the eye-closing game for him. Now, every time he tries to close his eyes, the guy is always right behind him. He has trouble sleeping because he can't turn over during the night, or he'll see the guy lying under his bed. So don't stop, it's not worth it. Instead, keep staring at him even when he stares back. Some people say you'll start to feel like he's there in the room with you. Like when you zoomed in, you invited him into wherever you are, and now he's right in front of you. You'll feel an angry presence in the room, but do not open your eyes. You might feel like it's about to attack or even hear shallow breathing from in front of you, but this is just a trick he does to get you to open your eyes. After maybe 10 minutes, you'll feel him give up, and the silhouette will start to walk away from you, even though you never see it turn around. You'll still feel uncomfortable, but also successful. It's a weird feeling, but you get used to it. Give him a couple of minutes to get some distance away from you, or the uncomfortable feeling will last even longer, maybe 2 to 4 hours. If you rush it, he might still be close to you the next time you close your eyes. When I was a kid, I knew there was a monster in the attic. At first, my parents were indulgent. They bought me a nightlight, and on really bad days, they let me sleep in their bed. However, as time went on, they grew less and less patient with me. They told me I needed to grow up, that big girls aren't scared of monsters. No matter how many times they said monsters were real, I knew they were lying. The access to our attic was in my room, and most nights, the hatch inched upward as I lay paralyzed with fear on the bed below. I saw the monster watching me and listened to it breathe, heavy and deep. When I called for help, the attic hatch was always closed by the time one of my parents came to my rescue. This fear persisted for so long that I was taken to a therapist. She spoke to me in that overly sweet, fake voice adults use to deceive kids they think are too young to understand better. We acted out scenes using puppets, and she encouraged me to draw the monster. That was easy. I'd seen it clearly on many nights, a long neck, undersized head, and one glaring red eye. It looked like a lamprey. Ultimately, therapy didn't work. I developed my own anti-monster measures. The blanket became my force field. As long as the monster couldn't see me, it would get bored and retreat into the ceiling. Even on the hottest nights, I remained curled under a thick comforter. I also held it above me when I had to get up and use the bathroom. The monster hated water, too. I'd load up a plant spray bottle and squirt it, causing it to hiss and retreat. Eventually, I caused it enough trouble that the monster got fed up and went to find another kid to scare. My parents breathed a sigh of relief and never brought it up again. Last year, I visited my parents in their home. Somewhere in the reminiscing, my mom brought up the attic monster. She laughed, but I was intrigued. Retrieving a ladder from the basement, I prepared to face my childhood fears. The attic had been sealed off and insulated by the time my parents bought the place, though it used to be a part of the house. There was some forgotten wicker furniture and other assorted junk. And, oddly, a camcorder. I brought it downstairs and popped the tape into my parents' old VCR, expecting old family movies. I was not prepared to see my younger self on the screen, staring up from my bed directly into the lens of the camera. My grandmother's weight loss. I've read so many weight loss horror stories on Reddit, most of them tales of tapeworms. However, I have one that my grandmother told me. She is 92 years old and has lived through quite a lot. I used to love her stories when I was younger, but as I got older, her stories became more and more depressing and sometimes downright terrifying. This is one of them. To make things easier, I'm writing it from her perspective, just as she told me the story. I was never happy with my body. I was a chubby little girl and grew up to be a chubby teenager. Boys didn't like me, girls made fun of me, and even my own mother would try to slim me down by doing things like cutting desserts from my diet or not allowing me to have seconds. It hurt, having your own mother openly criticize you. I just wanted to be skinny and pretty. But then things changed. We moved, first of all. That's when my weight loss began. I spent most of my time with my mother. I continued not eating desserts, and I definitely did not get seconds. I was put on a very low-calorie, restrictive diet. Mainly soup. It was broth, and sometimes I get some meat in it, but mostly it was just vegetables. That was for dinner. In the morning, I would have 1 cup of coffee and toast, sometimes with butter, sometimes without. No lunch and no snacks. That was my daily food. I lost weight so quickly I could barely believe it. At first, I felt good about it. All I ever wanted was to be skinny, right? My ribs started poking out without me sucking in my stomach. I could walk without feeling my leg fat jiggle with each step. But then I kept losing weight. My ribs that poked out? I could count them. I was dizzy and weak. I was exhausted when I fell into bed every night. I stopped getting my period. My skin was rough and dry, like I hadn't moisturized it in years. I felt and looked like a skeleton. Nobody could stop me from losing weight, though. My mother cried when she saw me naked. There was nothing she could do. I was beyond her help. This went on for years, this restricted calorie diet of mine. My severe weight loss almost caused my death. However, I was saved. I left Auschwitz, and for the first time in my life, I was grateful to gain weight. I met my girlfriend, Victoria, 7 months ago in a bar. We felt an instant connection and started dating 3 days later. She brought nothing but happiness, the perfect definition of a soulmate. So when I graduated from university, we both agreed to move in together. She's 2 years older than me and was already working, so I moved into her house. However, after moving in, everything went downhill. The first incident happened on the first night of moving in. Victoria works the night shift, so she was getting ready to head out. "Babe, I'm off to work now. Just to tell you again, the neighbors next door get a little cranky at night, so just ignore them," she said sweetly. Yeah, I get it," I responded. I gave her a kiss goodbye, and she left, leaving me alone in her house. I sat down at the kitchen table and got to work. For context, I work remotely as a character designer for a video game company. It was peaceful for a few hours until the clock hit 2 a.m. The cranky neighbors began screaming profusely. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it sounded like an intense argument. I tried ignoring it for a while, but eventually the sound became unbearable. Banging was heard on the walls, glass shattering on the floor, followed by more screaming and arguing. It sounded like multiple voices overlapping each other. I tried blasting music in my headphones, but that didn't help. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, so I called it a night and stopped working. The next day passed by in a flash. I chose not to tell Victoria about the neighbors since it was apparently normal, and I didn't want her to think that it bothered me so much. It was her house, after all. Nighttime came, and I was watching TV on the sofa when the arguments from the neighbors came again. Thumping, glass shattering, furniture being thrown around. You'd think their house was a WWE ring. Jesus Christ, I muttered to myself. Suddenly, I started hearing banging on the door, followed by a blood-curdling scream. What the heck? I said while pausing the movie I was watching. The neighbor was trying to break into the house. That was it. That was the last straw. I got up and went to the back door where the banging and screaming were coming from. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen table in case the man would break the door. Thank God it was locked. Just in case, I leaned against it, each punch crushing my back. My heart was racing, my hands were shaking. I didn't know what to do. For all I knew, the man could seriously hurt me. It felt like an eternity before what I'm assuming was a man stopped banging on the door. Concurrently, the screaming stopped and it was silent. The heck, I muttered under my breath. There was no way I was going to live in these conditions. I decided that I was going to confront Victoria about it when she got home. With that in mind, I made sure all the doors were locked, windows shut, and went to bed. A few hours later, at 6 a.m., my girlfriend got home and laid down in the bed next to me. She hugged me from behind and gave me a kiss on the nape, waking me up. "How's everything?" she asked softly. Were the neighbors loud? I grunted and turned my head to face her, rubbing my eyes. What? Victoria giggled. How did it go with the neighbors? I found it strange that she asked me that today but not yesterday. Maybe it was me being tired. The husband tried breaking in, I said. He banged on the door for at least 2 minutes, screaming. I thought that was the end for me. Seriously, Victoria, I don't think this house is safe for us to live in. As long as the door is locked, you should be fine, she smiled sweetly. I gave Victoria a serious look. Listen, I can't live with these conditions. I tried to say it as nicely as possible. I didn't even feel safe in this house last night. You're telling me this is going to happen every single night? Victoria looked down, her eyelids drooping in discomfort. I felt bad blaming her for something that wasn't her fault, but we obviously needed to do something about it. I can't fear for my life every night. I'll call the wife tonight and see if anything can be done. She hugged me tightly. Okay? I smiled and kissed her forehead. Thank you, baby. I know it's not your fault, but it's impossible to live in fear in my own house every night. On the following evening, Victoria left for her night shift. Once again, I was left alone in her house. She texted me around 15 minutes later, telling me that the problem was solved and that it should be better tonight. I thanked her and laid down on the sofa to wind down. I ended up falling asleep while watching a movie. I woke up a few hours later at 4 a.m. to screaming from the psychotic neighbors once again. Furious, I got out of bed and prepared myself for confrontation. I was ready to finally get to the bottom of this. However, as I walked closer to the front door, something felt off. I noticed the voices and banging were a little closer than usual, as if they were in the same house. It was the first time I ever paid attention to where the sound was truly coming from, but it was still unexpected. Subtle, but unexpected. Following the traces of sound, the screams didn't take me to the front entrance or to the house next door. They took me to the basement door, the only part of the house I hadn't gone into yet. My heart began racing. This has to be my hallucinations. The sounds can't be coming from my girlfriend's basement, right? With my legs trembling, I tried to push the basement door open, but it was locked. It only resulted in even louder screams coming from downstairs. They sounded like a cry for help. What the heck is down there? I muttered. The thought alone sent shivers down my spine. Thankfully, or unthankfully, My uncle taught me lock-picking when I was younger in case I was in a dangerous situation where I needed it. Thanks, Uncle Will. So if there has ever been an opportunity to use that skill, it would be now. I took 2 paper clips and started fidgeting them inside the lock. In just a few minutes, the door unlocked, but it still wouldn't open. I looked around the house for anything I could use until I found a crowbar. Using all my might, I pushed the door open. Looking back, I wish I hadn't. Instantly, I heard loud, blood-curdling screams piercing my ears. Screams that you would only hear in horror movies. Covering my ears, I forced my way downstairs. What I saw was horrific. Dead bodies of dozens of guys were organized in a line on the floor across the basement. Worst of all, every guy there looked to be around my age, many looking like the exes Victoria had talked about in passing. Above them was a jar. Inside it looked to be their faces with a large glow surrounding them. They were screaming in absolute, agonizing pain. From what I saw, it looked to be their souls. The sealed, trapped souls of innocent men facing endless pain in their afterlife. The stench was unbearable. Their bodies were bled out, as if everything inside of these men were sucked out to leave only their pure skin. Despite that, their faces were somewhat recognizable, each body neatly placed to keep its original shape. Their names were written in blood in front of each body. Jack, Noah, Michael, etc. Their screams sounded more like loud gasps from up close. The room was so loud I was getting dizzy. The screams only got louder, their sound loud enough to screech into my brain. My mind went blank, my body shaking at the thought that this was my girlfriend's creation. It got even worse when I got to the end. Another name written in blood, with no body behind it, as if it was still being prepared, Dylan. That was my name. I then got a notification on my phone. A message from Victoria. My heart stopped just by reading it. Hey, babe, on my way home. Sorry about yesterday. Let's have some fun tonight, winky face. I found an abandoned Nissan in the Alaskan bush. What happened afterward haunts me to this day. Back in my 20s, I was what you might call an adventure girl. About 10 years ago, give or take, something happened that changed that. I moved to the city, got a boring job in a boring apartment, and became decidedly averse to the outdoors. I haven't really told anyone about it in all that time, save my now wife, because, well, for one, they think I'm crazy, and for two, I don't want to think about it. I'm finally putting it here though, because you all deserve to hear it. After all, you probably saved my life. At the time, I had just graduated college and moved from Texas to Alaska, out of a desire for, you guessed it, adventure. I had a job doing stuff I liked. It paid well and gave me enough vacation days to get out and do something really adventurous every once in a while. One thing I had on my bucket list since moving north was driving the Delta Highway. For the unfamiliar, that's a, generously, highway that goes from Fairbanks to Prudhoe Bay on the Arctic Ocean. It's a 500-mile, 11-hour drive in the summer, but thanks to work realities, I wasn't able to get out there until early autumn. By early autumn, the snow had started, but the plows were still able to keep the highway pretty clear, and I was driving a 95 Toyota Land Cruiser kit out for expeditions. I absolutely loved that thing. Besides that, I was an adventure girl. I was prepared. I had camping gear, emergency gear, a satellite phone, plenty of food and water, enough jerry cans for the trip there and back, and Sam Colt's greatest invention in the center console, just in case. For the unfamiliar, that's the 1911. I absolutely love that gun. I was planning to make the trip in 2 days, sleeping in the back of the Land Cruiser halfway. I had enough blankets to keep warm, and I had a nice comfy space back there that I could fit in. I'd have to drive slower because of the snow, I wanted to enjoy the scenery, and the sun was setting pretty early by that time of year. I had a good start that day, and the driving was fine. By the time things went wrong, it had been dark for about an hour, and I was getting into the foothills of the Brooks Range. That's good scenery and also terrain I didn't want to be going through in the dark, so I was just about ready to pull over for the night when I saw caution flashers up ahead. For the unfamiliar, a hard rule for any Alaskan is that you always pull over when you see someone in distress on the side of a remote road like that, especially after the snow starts. If they aren't prepared for an emergency, there is a very good chance that you could save their life. So, that's exactly what I did. I pulled over next to a Nissan SUV, not as nicely kitted out as mine, but not bad either. I figured they were doing the same thing I was. Small world. By the jack under one axle and the wheel sitting next to the car, they'd blown a tire. What I didn't see, though, were the people. I got out of my Land Cruiser, crunching down into the snow, and looked around. There aren't a ton of trees that far north, but there are quite a few patches of evergreens that, while not quite forests, can be pretty dark and thick on a snowy night. "Hey!" I called, my voice going dead a few yards away, as sound does in snowy woods. "Y'all need help?" No answer. Dead silence, save the faint clicking over the flasher from inside their Nissan. I shouted again. "Anybody there? I've got tools." No answer. Dead silence. I considered myself a pretty brave person back then, but I'll admit that I was creeped out at this point. This vehicle definitely hadn't been here for all that long, but there was no one to be seen. Besides that, the dead quiet and the darkness of the night were unnerving. It wasn't that weird for it to be silent on a snowy night like this, that far north, but still creepy. Creepy enough that I hopped back in the car and grabbed my .45, storing it in one of the big pockets in the front of my jacket. Just in case. There were bears up there. I approached the Nissan and saw footprints in the snow. Okay, not a ghost car. One pair had been crouched down at the removed tire, and the other had been standing a couple feet away, by the rear of the SUV. The latter pair had then, at some point, headed off toward the tree line. It stopped a few yards down, paced around a bit, then continued into the woods. The pair near the tire had then, presumably later, gotten up and ran after the first. I was no tracker, but it's not hard to tell when someone was running in snow. Now I was really creeped out. I was tempted to hop back in the car and keep driving for a good long while, but, like I said, this could easily have been life or death up there. Besides, I had my .45. It could handle a grizzly. Probably. That was the worst I'd find up here. Probably. So, off I went, following those two sets of footprints into the woods. It was really dark, but don't worry y'all, I had a really nice flashlight. Surefire, baby. Adventure girl, remember? The dead quiet seemed to get even deader and quieter as soon as I passed the tree line, as sound does in snowy woods. Probably. The only thing comforting me that I hadn't gone deaf was the sound of my breath and my boots crunching in the snow. "Hey!" I called again, maybe 20 yards into the woods. "Is everyone okay?" This time, I got a response. It was a woman's voice, and it sounded afraid. "Over here," it called. "Help." I got a spring in my step at that, jogging toward the sound of the voice, shining my light through the trees to try and catch a glimpse. "Over here," it called again, much closer. "Help." Remember when I said y'all probably saved my life? This is when that happened. I stopped. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and a chill ran down my spine. Something was off about that voice. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was just slightly wrong. I pointed my light toward where I had heard it. "Are you hurt?" I said, voice raised, but not quite shouting anymore. "Help," the voice called again, only it was even closer this time. I hadn't heard the crunch of any footsteps. "Over here." My grip on my flashlight tightened, and my heart started to hammer in my chest. This was not right. I'd read a lot of horror stories back then, and had watched and listened to my fair share of spooky stories. At the time, I didn't think any of this stuff was real, but what was happening to me felt way too familiar, and it was setting off alarm bells. Something about this exact situation was tugging at the back of my mind as something I should be terrified of. I tried one more time. "What's your name?" I asked cautiously. "Help," the voice called, and it couldn't have been more than a few yards off. That was enough for me to swap my light to my left hand and bring out the Colt with my right. I pointed both in the direction of that voice and finally caught a glimpse of something besides trees. Off in the distance, barely visible, I could see a bundle of something lying in the snow. It was human-sized, and the snow all around it was stained dark. My head was in the middle of processing what I was seeing when I saw movement between me and the body. Oh, shit, that was a body. I pointed my flashlight and gun at the source of the movement. It was humanoid, with 2 arms and 2 legs, but it was all wrong. The limbs were too long, and it was too tall. Its hair was thin and wiry, it had antlers, freaking antlers, and its face, which was also, I assure you, really freaking wrong, was stained dark with what I can only assume was blood. I fired 2 shots and hauled ass. I don't know if the bullets slowed it down. I don't even know if I hit it. I ran faster than I'd ever run before, and by the cracking branches and crunching snow behind me, it was giving chase. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest, and my lungs burned from sucking in the frosty air. Once or twice, I saw death flash before me as I nearly lost my footing in the snow, but I managed to stay upright. As I ran, I heard more snapping, more crunching, not just behind me now, but all around. There were more. I got really freaking lucky that night. I was lucky to have spotted the body, lucky to have run just fast enough and not fallen on my face, lucky none of the whatever they were, I have a guess, but I'd rather not hazard it, were just a bit closer or faster. I was lucky that I had dabbled in enough spooky stories that my alarm bells had gone off, and I was lucky that the poor couple, maybe, in that Nissan had gotten stranded there and suffered the grisly fate they suffered. After all, I was planning to stop just as I saw those caution flashers. I'd have been right there, in those same woods, asleep. I don't want to think about what would have happened to me if that had been the case. I made it to my car, which I was again lucky to have left running, thinking I wouldn't go far. I leapt in, slammed and locked the door, and threw it in reverse as I saw dark, lanky shapes coming out of the trees. As I got moving, the headlights revealed what had been chasing me. I can't say exactly how many it was, at least half a dozen. All of them were similarly stretched, pale to the point of being almost white, with various forms of antlers and primitive-looking clothing. I reversed down the road as fast as I dared, without risking going off and dooming myself to certain death, for a good half-mile before I finally got the nerve to turn around. Then, I flew down the highway all the way back to Fairbanks, only stopping once I found a nice, well-lit hotel in the middle of the city. The next day, I was back in Anchorage. I thought about calling the state troopers. Someone was going to find the Nissan, probably find the bodies. They'd find my casings, my tire tracks. I could end up a murder suspect. I decided against it, though. If I ratted myself out, I'd be a murder suspect anyway, and then they'd know it was me. Better to bet that no one could tie me to that scene, especially being as far from local as I was. Over the next week, I packed my stuff, bailed on my job and my lease, and moved back to Texas. I never ended up with police banging on my door, so I guess I made the right choice. I still have nightmares about those wrong, elongated things chasing me. I probably have PTSD, but it's not like I can talk to a therapist about it without ending up in a loony bin. I'm not an adventure girl anymore. I never go anywhere at night, and I stay in this city as much as possible. I didn't get out of there unscathed, but I got out of there alive, which is better than can be said for the folks in the Nissan. I was lucky. The dollhouse murders. I was still new to the evidence locker when the dollhouses were brought in. I had been warned that I'd see some strange, disturbing things coming in and out of the cage, but I never could have imagined anything like that. I'd only been an employee for the sheriff's office for a month when the call came down. My boss, Gavin, answered, and after a lot of monotone yeps and ahs, he scribbled something down and hung up. "Gotta make some room," was all he said. If there was one thing I'd learned in my time working under Gavin, it was to just do as I was told and wait for him to explain later. I spent the next hour reorganizing and recataloguing an entire shelf of evidence in preparation for our newest arrival, wondering the entire time what exactly we were getting that was going to require so much space. After I'd finished entering the last item number into the system, Gavin spun his chair around slowly and folded his hands over his stomach. "You hear of the Tri-County killer?" I rolled my eyes at him. Of course I had. Everyone had. The media loved a good murderer, especially when they could give him an overly dramatic nickname. Serial killer, no real MO except for leaving weird drawings of the victims' houses at the scene, no relation between victims, seems to murder at random, yeah. I recited the Reader's Digest version of his long, gruesome list of misdeeds. "Well, aren't we a little Mississippi know-it-all?" he said dryly. "You know they caught him?" I jerked around, eyes wide with excitement. "They did? How? When?" Gavin shrugged, as if it wasn't a big deal. "Early this morning." Apparently, he finally made a mistake. Wow. 6 years, 5 victims, and countless hours poured into the investigation, and he was finally in custody. That was the kind of news that had made me want to join law enforcement, even if I was just an evidence clerk. "What happened?" I asked eagerly. "Don't know the details yet. We're getting the first shipment of his stuff this afternoon. That's what the space is for. We'll probably find out more then." I was expecting murder weapons, souvenirs from his victims, some kind of paraphernalia that would give us a glimpse into his twisted mind. I watched the officers carry in 6 large items concealed in black garbage bags and lay them gently on the open shelf for me to tag and inventory. I could barely keep myself from peeking inside to see what they were. "These are from the Tri-County killer case?" I asked Gavin excitedly after he'd finished a lengthy conversation with the officers. "Yep," he said as he unwrapped the first one. Inside was one of the most intricate and detailed dollhouses I'd ever seen. I looked from it to Gavin and back again, more than a little curious and confused. "Well," he looked pointedly at my paperwork, "you going to get started or what?" The dollhouse was adorable. There was no other word for it. I had to resist running my fingers over the delicately carved trellises and the smooth railing of the wraparound porch, both a bright white against the pale pink siding. The second story's large windows seemed to stare out at me like so many eyes, and I could see myself reflected in the real glass of their panes. I was still baffled by its relation to the Tri-County killer, but I didn't ask any questions. Gavin would offer up an explanation in his own time. I snapped a few pictures, looking for anything noteworthy to document, and that's when I noticed the hinges. The dollhouses opened up. After pulling on a pair of latex gloves, I found the latch and gently separated the 2 halves. The interior was just as intricate as the exterior. Each room was painted or wallpapered, finished with miniature crown molding, carpeting, and light fixtures. Tiny pieces of furniture were arranged throughout, and it was even decorated with paintings and fake plants. Someone had put this together with a great amount of care and attention to detail. But no room was more lovingly crafted than the kitchen. It looked like a tornado had run through it. Small bottles of what looked to be spices were spilling out of a cabinet. A bowl of apples had been overturned and its contents scattered across the counter. Little envelopes and magazines had been spread out over the floor as if they'd been swept off the table. And beneath them, the white and blue checkered laminate had been splashed just so with flecks of red paint that pooled beneath the legs of a kitchen chair. The woman seated in the chair had been carved so finely and painted so realistically that it was almost hard to believe it was just a wooden doll. The stump of her neck still seemed to glisten wetly, and, as absurd as it was, I felt certain if I touched it, I'd come away bloody. No amount of effort had been spared in recreating the torn sinew and exposed bone. The doll's blouse was stained crimson around the collar. On the tabletop, her outstretched hands had been skewered into place by 2 knives, and, between them, her head had been placed. The doll's sockets had been left empty, and thin lines of red ran down her cheeks. Black thread was woven through her lips, stitching them together. On the fridge, held in place by a blue lobster magnet, was a crude sketch of the house. "You need to see this," I breathed, at once impressed and repulsed by the work that had gone into creating this murder in miniature. "Oh, I have an idea of what's in there," he replied, snapping a picture of the open house, a small New England cottage, in front of him. Intrigued, I moved to stand beside him. In his house, which showed the same level of artistry, a male doll was nude handcuffed to a shower curtain rod in a tub. The doll's body was marred by detailed slashes all along its arms, torso, and legs, and a great deal of time had been spent on capturing all the horror of a castration. A tiny but still recognizable sketch of the house was taped to the bathroom mirror. "This is insane." "Are these?" "Yep." He recreated the murder scenes. "Why?" I crouched to get a better look at the bathroom and its unfortunate occupant. Killers like souvenirs. I guess this was his version. But he only had 5 victims. We have 6 houses. 6th one was probably today's mark. Right, the one he got caught with, I agreed. How accurate are they? Pretty identical from what I was told. He took a lot of photos while he was on the scene and used them later. We're getting that collection tomorrow. Come on, we've still got 4 others to do. You can order these all you want after the work's been done. After I finished documenting everything in the pink dollhouse and taking my pictures, I closed it back up and moved down to the next one. The garbage bag covering it fell away easily, and when I saw the house within, my heart lodged itself in my throat. I knew those blue shutters and that pale yellow siding. I'd always hated the combination. The front bay window, even in its recreation, had the same long, thick crack running across the bottom of it. The welcome mat on the porch, the small statue beside the front door, the decorative wreath with its oversized red bow hanging on the outer wall, I knew it all. If I turned the house around, I was sure there'd be a wind chime of Celtic crosses hanging over the deck and a thermometer decorated with hummingbirds. He hadn't spared any detail. "Gavin," I said, my mouth dry, "what happened to his 6th victim?" "The one from today?" He glanced up from whatever murder scene he just opened and frowned. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, what happened?" Let me look at the notes. Hang on." He went back to his desk to look up the case notes, leaving me to stare at the house, but he was taking too long. I couldn't wait. I had to know. I practically tossed my camera aside, almost sending it crashing to the floor, and spun the dollhouse wildly, looking for its latch. My fingers suddenly felt numb and clumsy, and when I found it, I fumbled with it until I was almost crying. Click. I wrenched the house open, only half prepared for the blood and carnage that awaited, and I inhaled sharply. The inside was completely bare and unfinished, no furniture, no decorations, no murder scene. I sagged against the table, unsure of what it meant, and slammed it shut. Whoa! Gavin had come up behind me and laid a hand on my shoulder. You okay? What happened to the sixth victim? I demanded as I spun to face him. Apparently he'd been scoping out a young woman for a few weeks. They found a ton of pictures of her home on his computer. And he got careless. Gavin quirked a brow at me uncertainly. He must not have checked the house thoroughly before trying to enter because he didn't realize the woman was dog sitting. I finished for him, and I pressed my hands over my mouth, horrified and hopeful. I had forgotten she was looking after Link for the week. Yeah, how did you know? Is she okay? I ignored his question. Yeah, the dog chased the guy into a closet and didn't let him out until the cops showed up. She wasn't even home when he broke in. He was planning to ambush her, same as the others. Why did you know that? What's going on? That house. I pointed to the half-finished dollhouse. It's rough, wooden interior still open and exposed, is my sister's. And after I'd said it aloud, giving voice to the implication of what could have happened, what would have happened if she hadn't been watching our brother's pit bull mix, I sank into the nearest chair and sobbed while Gavin patted me awkwardly on the back. The homeless in my neighborhood don't just want change. 2 whole years ago, my wife, Angie, and I decided it was finally time to buy a house. We knew it was anything but buyer's market, but we were sick of paying triple what a mortgage would cost in rent every month. I'm sure this story is familiar to some of you. We went through every stage of disbelief, anger, and finally apathy after every competitive offer we put together was blown out of the water by a multinational investment corporation. I'm not mad about the process anymore, although it left me questioning where society was headed. How is this legal? I went to school. I paid off debt. I got a good job. I did everything right to still get priced out of the city I grew up in. Perhaps some anger remains. But after setting our sights on the city's less desirable neighborhoods, we finally got our home. On June 1st, we moved into a 4,500 square foot colonial. It had hardwood floors that patinated like leather, and the frosted plaster trim gave the ceilings the look of a wedding cake. The basement was a different story. It wasn't just unfinished, it was a dank hole in the ground. Scribbled on the walls were strange spirals and crude faces. Kids, the realtor had said, like she knew who drew the markings. Fixing up the basement would be quite the value builder. So sure, the kitchen had composite counters, and the basement needed a sign above the entrance that read, "Abandon all hope ye who enter here," but we had a home. And a damn big one at that. The catch was that it was a stone's throw from the freeway, and the area was known for its crime more than anything else. Angie said it was just a stepping stone. We'd bank a year's worth of mortgage, hope the housing market kept rocketing, and move again in a year. There were some flaws in her plan, mainly money, but I didn't say anything. I figured we'd both adjust and learn to like it there. The first few weeks went smoothly. Angie and I got to unpacking and introducing ourselves to the neighbors. Maybe it was the threat of crime, or maybe there was comfort and purpose in knowing who you lived next to. Whatever it was, our neighbors were incredibly friendly. We felt at home quickly, and while there were some shocks, we made games out of them to take the fear away. With the pops that permeated the night, we had a game where we guessed whether the sound was fireworks or gunshots. When we passed large turds, one of us would point and play, human or dog. Unfortunately, after just a couple of weeks at this game, we became experts at differentiating between these. Gunshots carry the sharp crack of the sound barrier being broken, while fireworks go boom or pop. As for the poop, let's just say we hadn't seen any dogs large enough to lay landmines around town. There was a homeless problem there for sure, but they minded their own business. Our neighbors seemed to see right through them. They'd act as if they were ghosts, like they weren't even there. Hell, everyone did. I'd smile and say hello in passing. The least I could do was treat them like human beings. One night after a movie, I was at the sink washing the popcorn bowl. The window above looks out to our backyard, which was heavily wooded for a city lot. When it was dark out, I could only see a sliver of what was outside beyond the reflection of myself in the glass. I frowned at the shadow of a tall, dark stump. I didn't remember a tree there. I swayed on my feet to see past my reflection. In between the bushes, nearly out of sight, a man was standing still, staring back at me. My heart leaped, and I dropped the bowl, which crashed in the sink. "You okay in there, honey?" Angie shouted from the living room. "Yeah." I kept my eyes on the man and said nothing to Angie, not wanting to alarm her. "I'm gonna take the trash out." "Okay." I walked by the trash without touching it and opened the back door. "Hello?" Outside, the wind was blowing hard, and the branches of the buckthorn the man stood behind were waving wildly, as if to warn me. "What do you want?" I stepped forward to try and show I wasn't scared, but it was the tepid step of prey, like I was better planting my weight to run. The man said nothing. I took another step forward, more confidently this time, but jumped when my movement activated the motion light. I composed myself and yelled, "This is private property. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police." Now, this was the emptiest of threats, and everybody in the neighborhood knew it. The cops made a point to show up an hour late, if at all. The man walked forward a few paces to where I could see him better. He was very tall and wore a heavy wool overcoat that stretched all the way to his ankles. He kept walking toward me. My brain was shouting, but I froze in fear. "What do you want?" He stopped just in front of me. A white scar started across his black skin just below the chin. He was at least 6'6", but the coat that ran the entire length of his body made him gigantic. His face was recently shaven and gaunt. He held out his fist at arm's length, and when he uncurled his fingers, cupped in his enormous palm was a pill. "I don't have any substances," I said. His face didn't change any. There was no want or question in his eyes. "You want me to take it?" I pointed at his hand, but still, his expression was static. I reached out and gently plucked the pill from his palm. I held it between my forefinger and thumb. It was just a pill capsule. Whatever had been inside had been emptied. "What do you want?" I asked again. He opened his mouth, revealing the severed stump of a tongue, and then widened the enormous whites of his eyes. He began to mouth something, but being tongueless, I couldn't tell what. My blood cooled because I felt certain it was some kind of curse. "Please," I murmured. "Please leave." He turned and stepped into the night, and I watched the bushes sway in his wake as if he were a giant parting his way through the woods. The next day was Saturday, and I was determined to find out if anyone knew about this tall man. I walked to the strip mall and asked some of the homeless in the area, but as soon as I began to describe him, they all looked at the ground and shook their heads. The pattern was repeated with every other homeless person I tried to talk to. On my way home, I stopped by two men working on a car at the end of a driveway. "Hey," I started over to them. "This may sound a little crazy, but do you know of a tall fellow around here that wears a giant coat?" They both started laughing. "Sorry to waste your time." I turned to go. No. One of them waved me back. "You talking about a really big guy?" The man raised his hand to signify. "Yeah, black coat? Nasty scars?" "Yeah," I nodded. "Well, that's tall Frank. What you want to know about him?" You see him in your recycling? No, why? Tall Frank's a kin man. He makes his living that way. I nodded. He was acting weird in my backyard last night. Weird how? Was he just looking like his weird self? No. He was staring at me from outside. When I went out, he tried to say something. Or mouth something. Both of their brows rose. You saying that Tall Frank tried to communicate with you? Yeah. They both looked at each other. Tall Frank talks to nobody. And by talks, I mean communicates in any kind of way. He cut his own throat to never talk again, the other chimed in. That's just a rumor. Tall Frank showed up in this neighborhood 20 years ago. No one knows where he came from, and the man can't tell you. Yeah, people put all kinds of legend to those scars. Some say it was a dog that bit him, but I never seen no dog that'll slice your tongue out. If he doesn't communicate with anyone, how come he has the name Tall Frank? Well, that's what my mama would call him. He leaned closer to me. She used to tell me to watch my tongue, or Tall Frank will take it. He chuckled to himself. What do you think he wanted with me? They both shrugged. No clue. But you be sure to tell us when you find out. They bent back to their work, and I thanked them and went on, far less assured than when I'd first set out. The next several days, there was no sign of Tall Frank, but I began to fall ill. It was a headache at first, but soon I had heart palpitations and body aches that I almost let take me to the emergency room. I assured myself that there was no such thing as curses. Why was I letting one strange encounter with a homeless man dominate my every thought? Angie was working late recently, and when I had the house to myself at night, I would stand at the kitchen window and stare into the backyard. I was obsessed, and it wasn't long before I saw him again. I was wrapped in a blanket, filling the teapot at the sink, when I saw him standing in the same place as before. I dropped the pot and ran to the back door. Hey! My head felt light, and I was in that same kind of hazy state where your fear hardly speaks to you. I scampered through the backyard over to him. What do you want with me? Tall Frank was staring at me. He gestured with his scarred neck for me to follow. I looked down at my bare feet, but he was already walking. Hey! Just leave us alone. I stepped cautiously after him. When I got past the bushes where I could see the alley, I saw him standing near the trash cans. I ran after him. You! I don't ever want to see you back here again. With our difference in size and the blanket wrapped around my shoulders, I'm sure I looked at him like some angry hobbit. He certainly didn't act intimidated, and I can't blame him. Tall Frank crossed the alley and sat on a crumbling retaining wall. He gently tapped the stone next to him for me to sit. I'm not sitting. He reached into his breast pocket and paused before pulling out an envelope. Then he put the letter in his other hand and reached in again, pulling out another. What are those? He extended the envelopes to me. His long arm nearly stretched the entire alley. I approached the letters cautiously, snatching them and stepping back. What are these? I muttered, already distracted. They had both been opened, and I took the papers out of one of the envelopes. It was a handwritten letter on college roll paper. All the ink was smeared, like it had been dunked in water, but I could still read it, albeit slowly. When I was done reading, I let my arm fall down to my side and stared at Tall Frank in disbelief. Angie had a lover. I looked at the other envelope and hardly had to read it to figure it out. The letter had read, Atlantic Life Insurance. A policy had been opened in my name for $250,000. I stumbled over to the retaining wall and sat. The capsules. I thought about the empty capsule he'd shown me that I tossed aside. It was my emergency albuterol. It had to be. A quick WebMD search showed that an overdose started with symptoms of headaches and heart palpitations. Angie is trying to kill me? Suddenly, I realized tall Frank's arm was around me, and he was patting my shoulder paternally. We sat there in silence for a long time. The things you can learn from people's recycling, I said. Tall Frank nodded, and we watched the upstairs light turn on. My wife appeared in the window. She twisted something in her fingers and then tapped it into a mug. A minute later, I heard the back door open. "Honey, are you out here?" Angie called. "I made you some tea." I guess the homeless around here don't always want change. Sometimes, they might want to save your life. The perfect family. My brother, Elliot, and I are close. Don't get me wrong, it's nothing weird or anything like that. We're just close. Sure, as kids, we fought over dumb stuff as brothers and sisters do. And as teenagers in high school, he pretended not to have a little sister, while I pretended he was just another jerk jock. But despite all of that, we're close. Now that he's out of the house and I'm in college, we don't see each other as often, but we try to talk on the phone at least once a week. Not many people can pinpoint why they are close with their siblings, but I can. And I know he can too. Maybe without our shared experience, we still would have been close, but what happened to us really nailed it down. We never talk about it, but I know we both remember it. Every time someone suggests telling scary stories or starts talking about odd experiences, it looms heavily over us. Even to this day, I can't make sense of it. But this is the reason my brother and I are so close. If nothing else, this is the one thing we will always have in common, the one thing that will keep us together. It happened in the summer. I was 9 years old, and my brother was 12. It had been a pretty uneventful summer so far. We grew up in a sleepy town in the Northeast. It sits on the coast and is pretty much split in two, with half of the residents being dock workers or fishers and the other half being the wealthier type who commute to the city every day. With the exception of my family and a few others, it's mostly those richer people who have children. Even though the town is on the coast, it's not exactly a tourist attraction, so many of those wealthier people often leave on vacation for the summer. This, of course, means their children are gone as well, which left my brother and me with long, boring summers when all of our friends were away. This summer was no exception. At some point during this summer, our parents began to get fed up with us. Being bored and young, we often got into things and caused trouble. Looking back, I have to laugh. I mean, we really gave my mother, who worked from home, a hard time. Elliot and I would run around, yelling and breaking things while my mother tried her hardest to get work done in her office. My father was out working on the docks. One day, I guess my brother and I were being particularly terrible, and my mother finally told us to go play outside. She even said we could go into the woods behind our house if we wanted to, something she had never let us do before. Of course, she told us we could only go so far, but still, it was like we had a whole new world to explore. So, Elliot and I gathered some adventurer stuff we needed to explore this new territory. Elliot grabbed his backpack from inside, a small green one with his name stitched across the side and frogs lining the outer pocket. He filled it with a compass he had gotten for his birthday, some walkie-talkies, a notebook to take adventure notes, and some band-aids. I was in charge of the necessities, which to us included a box of Pop-Tarts, 2 water bottles, and a bag of goldfish. It was around noon when we set off to explore the woods behind our house. With a worried smile and a warning to be back before 1:30, my mother sent us off. We started simple, walking in a straight line from the center of our backyard into the woods. To be honest, I'm not quite sure what we found so exciting. The woods were thick, and the air was hot and sticky, but still, we really felt like adventurers. Every once in a while, my brother would mark a rock or a tree with a sharp rock he had found so that we wouldn't get lost on the way back. We were about 30 minutes into our exploration and couldn't have been more than half a mile away from our backyard when we saw it. There, in the woods, sat a little house. It was squat and made of brick and stone, and it looked neatly kept, as if someone had just dropped it out of the sky. Naturally, my brother and I decided to move closer and get a better look. As we walked, we noticed the plants from the woods around it thinning out and crunching under our feet. The closer we got, the more dead plants crunched beneath us. We thought nothing of it and kept going until we reached the side window of the house. We peeked into the window, praying no one was there to catch us snooping. What we saw has been ingrained in my mind forever. It was a perfect, pristine, 1950s style kitchen, all pastel blue cupboards and linoleum tiles. I looked at Elliot, and he looked back at me. There was something eerie about this. It was clean and perfect, way too perfect to be in the middle of the woods. What is this place? I asked Elliot, my voice quivering. I couldn't put my finger on it. This whole thing was just creepy. I don't know, he answered, not turning his head away from the window. He took my hand in his and continued looking through the window. I'm not sure why, but I had the sudden urge to run. To take off with my brother and forget this place even existed. Before I could say anything to him, we heard a booming voice behind us. Can I help you? We turned around, wide-eyed and fearful at the idea that we had gotten caught snooping. There stood a man in a crisp gray suit and a matching hat, a wide smile spread across his face. My brother was the first to speak. No, sir. Sorry to bother you. We didn't know anybody lived here. The man laughed, just as booming as his voice. Well now, of course someone lives here. What's a house without someone living in it? Elliot and I looked at each other, completely thrown off by this man's friendliness. He had just caught two strange kids spying into his home and acted as if we were old friends. Say, what's your names? Would you like to come in? My wife and I were just about to have lunch. I glanced at Elliot, and he glanced at me. This whole situation was so surreal that we did the first thing that came to mind. We introduced ourselves. I'm Elliot, and this is my sister, Gracie. Darling. We heard a woman's voice call out from behind the house. Lunch is ready. As the woman rounded the corner, Elliot and I took a step back. Just like the house and the man, the woman was completely perfect. She wore a bright red house dress that flared out at the waist, and her hair was curled like a doll's. Just like her husband, she had a large smile plastered across her face. Compared to the forest around us, they both stuck out like sore thumbs. Well, who are these two lovely children? She cooed. Darling, this is Elliot and his sister Gracie. They both continued to smile at us until the man spoke. Why don't you come around for lunch? You can meet our children. They're just about your age. Before we had any chance to do otherwise, the man put his hand on my brother's shoulder, leading him away. The woman took my hand gently and followed him, continuing to smile the whole time. I'm Mary Jean Edwards, and that's my husband, Robert Edwards. She smiled down at me. I nodded feebly, and as we turned the corner, I saw a small door which led to the kitchen. Robert was already leading my brother inside. I've made up some fresh lemonade and turkey sandwiches for lunch. I hope that's all right, Mary Jean said, gesturing for Elliot and me to sit down at the round table. We also have some potato chips, hot dogs, and I've just made cookies. As if to emphasize the point, she opened the oven, and the scent of fresh cookies wafted out. Mary Jean, where did those kids run off to? Oh dear, I'm not sure. Perhaps they're in the foyer. 1 minute. Mary Jean ran off, her heels clicking on the linoleum. Robert just continued to stare down at us, smiling. "Here they are," Mary Jean announced as she returned, 2 children, a boy and a girl, in tow behind her. Of course, they were no different than their parents. Each had a wide smile plastered onto their faces and flawless blonde hair. The girl was wearing a perfect purple dress with a white collar, the kind I normally would have envied, and her hair was pulled back in 2 braids with perfect matching purple ribbons. The boy was wearing a more leisurely outfit of a polo shirt and crisp khakis, his hair parted to one side. Mary Jean gestured to her children. "This is Bobby, and this is Linda." Neither child said anything, but continued to smile at us. "Well, how about we all sit and eat? Everything looks delicious," Robert said as Mary Jean began setting out food. The kids sat across from us, and it was as I started to nibble on a sandwich that my brother kicked me under the table. I looked at him angrily, but he wasn't looking at me. He was white as a ghost, and his eyes were fixed on one of the children, the girl. She stared at us, actually us. She seemed to be looking at both of us in the eye at the same time. That's when I noticed what Elliot was looking at. A steady drop of blood trickled from her ear. She continued to stare at us, seemingly unaware of the blood and smiling, still smiling, just as the rest of the family, none of them eating. "Well, this is just delicious, Mary Jean," Robert said, breaking the silence. The food on his plate was untouched. "Thank you, darling. I know how much you love when I cook." I looked over at the boy, who was silently smiling at me, almost completely still. He blinked once, and even from across the table, I noticed a few of his eyelashes fall out. "Well, who wants some cookies?" Mary Jean stood, clearing the uneaten food of her family and replacing it with a platter of cookies. As she walked back to her seat, her foot caught the edge of my brother's chair. As she began to tip over, she grabbed the edge of the table, and that's when I knew for sure my brother and I had stumbled onto something completely unnatural. When she grabbed the table, her hand made a hard, hollow chink. I recognized the sound from all the times I had awoken after a doll dropped off my bed. I don't know how, but my brother and I seemed to get the same idea. We both jumped up from the table and ran out the door. I remember him grabbing my hand as tears streamed down my face. I kept crying and asking who those people were. We somehow managed to find our way back home, despite having no real concept of where we were going. My brother had dropped his backpack, compass included, in the house and didn't pick it up before leaving. When we got back to the house, we told our mother everything, crying the whole time. She called the police, and they searched the woods. They found nothing. No family, no house, no sign of anything that shouldn't be there. The police thought we were lying. My mother thought we just got spooked and somehow fabricated a memory. My brother and I, though, we know. We know it happened. Because just the other day, I got a call from my brother. Apparently, he had come home from work, and there was a package at the doorstep addressed to him. When he opened it, he said he nearly fainted. Inside was the tiny green backpack with the frogs on it. It was dirty and worn, but he could still make out his name stitched across it. What was worst, though, was that laying on top of it was a single, perfect, pristine purple hair bow. Angel was well named. She was the brightest, happiest child I'd ever known. Maybe it was genetic. Maybe good parenting. Who knows? Whatever it was, I lived for those days when her parents would bring her to visit me. Uncle Travis, she'd shout and leap into my arms. After she covered my cheek in feathery kisses, I'd set her down. She held my hands, walked up my legs, and I'd flip her. She squealed with laughter and begged for more. Again, Uncle Travis, she'd say, "Please, please, again. That was as demanding as she got. Most times, she was sweet, agreeable, and didn't ask for anything. Except for Bo. Every once in a while, from the time she was 2, Angel would stand in the middle of the hallway and point into the nearly empty closet. Bo, she'd say. There was nothing there. We tried handing her each box and knick-knack, every article of clothing, and box after box of old Christmas decorations. Each time, she'd shake her head stubbornly and say, "No." "Bo," then point at the closet again. We tried different words. Was she asking for a bear? A book? Snow? Dough? Nothing fit. "Bo," she insisted. "Bo." Eventually, she'd get tired of our ignorance and wander off to do something else, usually reading. She loved reading long before she ever learned what words actually were. I loved that about her and tried to encourage it as much as I could. I was probably the only single guy in the state with shelves full of children's books. One day, we were reading a book about a bunny named Bob. The girl in the story was carrying her bunny down the hallway to her parents' room. The story was about her fear of the dark, and one of the pictures was a black, gaping closet in the hallway. "Bo," said Angel when I reached the page. "Bo," I said. "The bunny?" I tapped Bob with one finger. "Bob," I said. "Bunny." Angel leaned against me, gave a contented sigh, and whispered, "Bo," before sticking a thumb in her mouth. I shared the tale with her parents. We were still a little confused, but then they found an old stuffed Easter bunny in their hall closet and handed it back to Angel. We were all relieved to have the mystery solved at last. From then on, whenever Angel said "Bo," we gave her the little bunny. She seemed content to hold it and suck her thumb. After a time, we started calling the bunny Bo, too. By the time she was 4 or 5, Angel had stopped talking about Bo, though she carted the stuffed rabbit around everywhere. Her mom had gone back to work, and my brother had never stopped working, so she spent a lot of time hanging out at my place that year. I was Uncle Travis, the free babysitter who sat home all day with no life to speak of. We enjoyed the time together, my niece and I. We did all the awful, childish things her parents never would have allowed if they'd known. We skipped nap time for video games and dug for worms in the mud. We made Angel cookies. With no cooking skills to speak of, I found a way to make sweet treats with Angel all the same. We took a store-bought chocolate chip cookie and slathered it with Cool Whip. Then we put a few Oreos in a Ziploc bag and smashed them into the tiniest crumbs. That went on top. Another chocolate chip cookie was smeared with peanut butter. Then we pressed them together like a sandwich and covered the whole thing in ice cream and chocolate syrup. "Don't tell Mommy," I warned. She nodded her head solemnly, ice cream melting all over her chin, dribbling onto her blouse. Her mom would give me a disapproving glare when she picked up a chocolate-stained child, but she never said a word. Angel was almost 6 when she went to kindergarten. On her first day of school, I puttered around the house, bored out of my mind. I was outside waiting for a good 20 minutes before the bus dropped her off. "Hey, Pumpkinhead," I said as a greeting. "I'm not Pumpkinhead," she replied. "I'm a big girl." Proudly, she held out a picture to show me. "I got a sticker." "Yeah, you did," I said. "That deserves an Angel cookie or 2. She agreed happily, but school had exhausted her, and she fell asleep on the couch before I could get everything together. We grew apart that year. Honestly, she was growing up, and I wasn't. We never spent any time together. She'd get off the bus at my place and take a nap, and before she woke up, her mom or dad would be there to pick her up. I missed my little buddy. And then, one day, she didn't get off the bus. It drove right past without slowing, and I stood there, stunned for a few minutes, not sure what to do. Finally, I found the list her mom kept updated on my fridge and called the school. I was pretty heated, but the woman who answered the phone swore Angel hadn't come to school that day. I called their house, got no answer, and then tried my sister-in-law on her cell phone. "What do you mean she didn't go to school?" she said. I dropped her off myself. And that's when my world fell apart. Within the hour, I was at my brother's house. Her parents were there, and the place was filled with cops. We were all questioned. The phones were tapped. We were on the lookout for a ransom note. The ransom note never came. Angel's backpack was in the lost and found at the school. I remember sitting over at her house a day or two later and looking through her school things. Bo the bunny, usually in her bag, was missing. I remember thinking that at least she had her toy to hold on to. At the bottom of the bag was a crumpled piece of paper. I opened it and saw a drawing she'd made, which, after a bit of concentration, I determined was her bunny sitting on a swing. Bo was printed in her shaky, childish capital letters in green crayon. I straightened out the paper, still in shock, lost, grieving. There was a big black smudge near the top of the page. I tried to brush it off and realized that it was another drawing. It was pretty detailed, but everything was so small I had to squint to see it. A man in a car with a girl in the seat beside him. On top of the car was a giant rabbit with fangs bared, clinging to the hood. The car was in front of a park very near my house. I called for my brother, and he came over and looked at the picture silently for several minutes before calling the police. They found her then, my little angel, half buried in the snow under an old maple tree. They never found the monster that took her life. That was over 10 years ago. You never really get over something like that, but you move on. You keep living. You don't stop hoping or grieving, but you go on living. I'm a married man now, with 2 kids of my own. Bobby is 7, and April is 2. They keep me sane. They keep me whole. But for the last week, I've been terrified. I was carrying April up to bed one night, and as we walked down the hallway, she pointed to the closet and said, simply, "Bo." She's repeated the motion every night. And tonight, when I went to tuck her in, I saw something that made my heart ache and my blood run cold. I've called the police, but I don't think they believe me. The windows are locked, and the house is empty except for my family, but Angel's bunny was sitting on April's nightstand. My grandfather never told me the full story of how he fled North Korea. After his passing, I discovered his journals and found this. 2 years ago, as I was going through my grandfather's personal effects after his funeral, I found a box full of photographs and books from his time as a young man in North Korea. He was 18 years old when he and his family suddenly left his hometown of Samdong. The following excerpt is from one of his personal journals that he kept as he followed his parents south across what would eventually become the DMZ years later. I have translated it to the best of my ability, with some help from my family. August 18th, 1945. We were waiting on the north shore of the Gang River for the boat that would ferry us to safety in a town on the other side. Father was talking to the men who had arranged to take us across. He should not speak too much. This is what got us into this mess in the first place. He likes to talk, mainly about things of which he knows very little, like God. What possessed him to take on the role of church elder 5 years ago, we will never know. My mother protested at the time, accusing him of taking on the Americans' religion. She was wrong, of course. Father was not baptized into Christianity for the sake of pleasing any outsiders, though he did like to please people. Father actually believed. He was a true convert to the religion of blood and broken bones. On a broken cross, he sang the Western hymns. I had never known a Korean man to sing so much about the state of his heart. It was shameful to me, and I knew it was embarrassing to Mother. So, when the pastor came to our house last night warning Father of the approaching communists, I understood why Mother yelled at him when the pastor left. He had brought danger upon our house, our family. I heard the pastor tell Father, "You are target number one." I understood that. Father is easily the most Western man in Sandong. He inherited his taste for fedoras and slim cigarettes from the Americans who would occasionally wander through town, praising the virtues of hard work and personal accountability. In our steel factory, he instituted the practice of bonus pay for workers who, in his eyes, earned it. Of course, this riled the local communists, but they were such a minority that Father found them easy to ignore. Until yesterday. Here we were, in late summer, the sun beginning its steady decline under the horizon, lighting up the clouds in a dazzling display as if reminding us that all things have their moment in the sun until darkness falls, drowning all dreams. Taehan was feeling a chill, so Mother wanted to start a fire, but the men forbade her. They said it would attract attention. My mother said we were too far from the road for anyone to notice. Then, one of the men said, "Not the notice of men." The other men looked away, as if hiding a shameful secret or fear. The way children look away when forced to admit a phobia of heights or spiders. My mother asked how they were supposed to cook our dinner, and the men just shrugged again. Frustrated, my mother uncovered a large pot of cold rice and another of stringed spicy beans and served them to everyone, including the men. Father then called for everyone to bow their heads for grace, and that is when one of the men grabbed Father's arm. "Don't," he said. "Not here." Father looked at him, challengingly. "He who does not give thanks for small blessings gives thanks for nothing," Father said. "You have it wrong," said the man. "We are very thankful, especially for our lives. That's why we would rather you didn't pray." The other men grumbled in agreement. I had no idea what he was talking about. Father straightened his back, his palms out as if Jesus himself before a crowd. "Brothers, what do you have against praying? Are we among friends or not?" Father scanned all their faces. "We have nothing against prayer," said the man. "But something does." "What do you mean, something?" asked Father. The man said nothing and turned his head towards the river. I peered out over its dark waters. It was wide and looked much too fast to swim safely. It meandered silently around the next bend, the shores gently sloping into the currents. Was there something in the river? Is that what he meant? I stared at that river for the rest of the evening as my parents prepared our camp. The ferry was not due until the morning. I awoke in the middle of the night under a ceiling of stars and a half moon off to the south, where we were hoping to be. Taehan was pressed up against me, rolled up in his blankets from head to toe. My nose was cold to the touch, so I pulled Taehan's blanket gently up over his face for warmth. I turned towards the sounds that had woken me. Father was still up, talking to one of the men. They were standing closer to the river. I strained my neck to try to hear what they were saying. "I worry about my youngest," I heard Father say. "He is not built strong. My oldest, I worry about too, but only because he wants to be a writer one day." The other man chuckled quietly. I could see them passing a clay bowl of mackerel back and forth between drinks. "Why didn't you want me to pray?" asked Father. The man finished taking a large sip from the clay bowl before passing it back to Father. "You ever have those American Christians pass through Sandong?" "Of course," said Father. "We had one here with his wife 5 years ago. He was a good speaker. So, when he announced a baptism in the river, everyone came. Father passed the bowl back to the man, who took another sip from it before continuing. I think there were almost 300 people here lined up to be baptized. People were being dunked, and they yelled with joy at the promise of salvation. Then this woman gave him her son. They were well known here. She was a panzori singer, not the best, but she put a lot of emotion into her singing. He accompanied her on a barrel drum even though he had some kind of handicap. He was very thin, and drool ran down the side of his mouth. He had trouble walking, but he could still hit that drum hard, with passion. Anyway, when she showed up with her son, you could see the American was nervous. I can still see him taking the boy, struggling to get him in the water. You could tell the boy wanted no part of this. He was gripping a small bouquet of yellow lilies he had picked that day. We would always see him in our streets with such an arrangement of flowers as he sat next to his mother, singing and begging for money or food. His mother was known to tell the neighbors how yellow was a calming color for him. So, when a Japanese soldier handed him some while marching through our town, the boy was entranced. But on the day of his baptism, I remember the way he turned his face towards his mother. Even though his condition made his face always look sad, I could tell he was even sadder that he had to do this to please her. And I can tell you, she did not understand what baptism was. She thought God had cursed her son and that if the boy was baptized, God would heal him. So, when the boy felt the strange white man speaking in an alien tongue put his hands on him and started pulling him backward into the deep, cold water, the boy started to panic. He began kicking and screaming. At one point, he even hit the man in the face. But the man kept pulling, yelling even louder, looking up at the sky. He tried pushing the boy's head in the water, but the boy kept fighting. So, the man pulled him into the deeper current, trying his best to calm the panicking boy. And then the man slipped. His feet had given way. But by this point, he was the boy's only source of balance, so when the man went underwater, so did the boy. The mother started screaming. Men jumped in the river. By the time the first man reached the American and pulled him up out of the water, the boy was gone. Then we heard the mother screaming, pointing downriver. I saw the head of the boy bobbing up and down in the current before he disappeared around the far bend over there. I could barely make out, in the faint moonlight, an arm outstretched to the west. Father had not spoken during this whole time, which was a rare occurrence. Having Father interrupt speakers was, for him, a part of the storytelling experience. A story was not a story unless he could somehow insert himself into the middle of it. If it was some small local gossip, my father somehow knew the subject of the scandal. If it was a tale of the beginning of the universe and God's intention for it, my father knew he was part of that purpose. So, it surprised me that he actually listened. Then Father spoke. What happened to the boy? We found his body on the far shore a few miles downstream, the man said. His mother was now alone in the world, except for a few neighbors who didn't much like her but still felt sorry for her son. The man cleared his throat. He was still clutching the flowers when they found him. I could see Father turn fully towards the river, his back to me. I heard him drink deeply from the bowl. That is tragic, said Father. They buried him out in that field, the man said, pointing to a place I could not see. His mother made sure to keep his tombstone adorned with the fresh yellow lilies the Japanese brought over from Mount Asama, the ones her son always carried around. Is his mother still here? Asked Father. I heard the man's footsteps on the stony beach as he paced. She was inconsolable, he said. She would stand in the town center and sing panzori by herself. No drum, just her voice echoing loudly through the streets. She had no tone, no drama, just the same level of emotion in every line, like some street merchant calling out her wares in the alleys. And it was always the same song. The man now crouched dramatically, and in his best panzery voice, began to howl these words. You came to me in the light of the moon, and that is how you left me, my boy. My sweet, innocent child. The waters took you from me, and I need you to return. Come back to me, or prepare a place for me beside you, where darkness hides my shame. I was moved. I had heard Panzori many times, but this particular rendition of her mournful wailing, knowing it was about real, fresh loss, struck me deeply. She sang this every hour, every day, for many days, he continued, now standing upright and taking a deep drink after his performance. I like a good Panzori here and there, but without the drum, it's just a crazy, lonely woman crying in the streets. But you have not answered if she is still living in town, said Father. In town, yes, the man answered. But not living. He turned and pointed somewhere I, again, could not see. She is buried next to her son. They found her by the river, very close to where they found her son. She threw herself into the river, asked Father. That is what most say, said the man. But there is another theory, or rumor. He looked around before continuing. Some say they saw something climbing out of the river a few nights after the child's death. It had a human shape, and it limped just like the boy. I could hear him taking a long drink before continuing. Some feared it was the ghost of the boy. Some think it was the boy himself, returned from the grave in bodily form. And some, he said, some people believe that the boy is a holy abomination, a product of a failed baptism. And it is these stories that make some people believe that he crawled out of the water to take his mother back with him. He heard her songs, her entreaties, and, being the obedient, dutiful son, complied. I suddenly felt the cold wrap itself around me, my ears and nose chilled from exposure. And then I heard Father praying. What are you doing? Protested the man. We don't pray by the river. If there is a curse here, it must be lifted through prayer, said Father. Through God comes all grace. There is no room for grace here, said the man, his voice rising. Your prayers will seem like mockery to him. You will stir his anger. In the dim light, I saw Father standing near the shore, his arms raised to heaven. A hushed prayer stole forth from his lips, and I could hear the river churning. Massive. Eternal. Moving. It was well past midnight when I awoke again. I heard a sound, a splash, as if someone were bathing in the river. But I could have been dreaming, given the stories I had heard that night. I was still groggy from sleep. I turned to Tehan, thinking it might have been him who made that sound. I carefully sat up without disturbing anyone and looked at the sky. Stars were everywhere, and the moon now hung higher in the night sky, lighting up the trees and hills around us. Father was still not back in his bedroll. I silently moved away from the makeshift camp in search of him. That was when I heard it. At first, it was so faint that I thought it was the breeze whistling through the trees. But then it grew steadily in volume to a hoarse whisper. And then, through the trees, the words drifted towards me. I have waited in darkness, my everlasting night to your spark of days. It sounded like the low, barely coherent sing-song ramblings of a drunken man, quietly growling a lazy Panzori. He sounded like any one of the men from the village we had met earlier that day. So I walked toward the voice. I thought if I followed the drunk, I would find Father. I cautiously walked toward the sound, but I had to be careful. It might be one of the men just relieving himself in the bushes, singing his inebriated tune to himself. My eyes were adjusting to the moonlight when I saw the figure slowly stumbling under the trees. He was clearly drunk. But instead of returning to the camp, the man walked further away from the river. I followed at a distance. I could see something in his hand as he swung his arms, probably a jar of makgeolli or soju. He still sang as he walked, his voice a soft, raspy timbre as if he were in pain. The water does not soothe nor save. Its chill stings like a flame of ice. He was bent over, lurching with each step, one arm by his side as if paralyzed. I followed slowly, cautiously, careful to stay in the shadows in case Father suddenly caught me trying to follow him. I lost track of how long I had been following this man when I realized I could no longer hear the river. I had been engaged in crouching and hiding from tree to tree for quite a while. I looked farther ahead and saw that the man had left the trees and was now shuffling through some tall grass in a clearing. Father was nowhere to be seen. But I thought perhaps he was passed out in that field ahead, and this man was returning to him with another jar of the local substance. I was so low in the grass that I was almost crawling. I occasionally propped myself up on one knee to make sure the man was still in sight. And that is when he sang the words that I know will haunt me for the rest of my life. "Oh, Mother, I have come for you. The waters have washed me clean, and they will cleanse you too, so we may together rest on the cool stones where the deep hides all secrets." I was frozen in my spot. Crouched, hidden by the grass, I found myself trying not to breathe for fear of being heard. And then, as carefully as I could, I peered over the grass. I could see him limping away from me in the light of the moon, his last words wrought with deep pain, laced with a terrifying sadness I had never heard before. Then he stopped. I could see his silhouette, his head turned towards something on the ground. He stooped down, and I heard something that chilled me even more. I heard weeping. But this time, his voice was different. Changed. It was the crying of a boy. Frightened beyond my wits, I crouched as low as I could. I was too afraid to look for fear of not only being seen by him, but of seeing his face. It was not something I wanted to look at, for his moon-tinged figure and the ghostly sound of his voice had already sent my imagination reeling at the possible horror producing those sounds. I had once seen a body dragged out of a river. It had been face down for many days when it was found. The face looked melted, the eyes eaten away by fish. The hair long and wispy, plastered to the forehead. That image now came to my mind as I fought the temptation to see it suddenly animated, its low-hanging mouth coming for me. And then, I heard its footsteps. Closer than I had remembered them to be. I looked up just in time to see the top of his head moving toward me. And I ran. I had never run so fast in my life. I didn't even look behind me for fear of seeing him hovering right over my shoulder, reaching a ghastly, decomposing hand toward me. I found myself running out from under the tree canopy and hurdling the logs lit by the moon. And as I raced forward, I suddenly saw the outline of my family's camp. And I stopped. I did not want to lure that thing toward my family. I was shaking, but I had no choice. And slowly, I turned to confront my fate, this entity that did not belong on this soil. And there was nothing there. I scanned my surroundings, and all was clear. It was all stillness and silence. My breath was coming in heaves, and then, feeling dizzy, I bent over and vomited onto the grass. I must have collapsed because that is where Mother found me. I was woken at the break of dawn with her kneeling over me, gently slapping my cheeks. She yelled for help and a blanket while others rushed to start a fire to warm my body. I was shaking from a night in the cold. "Where is your father?" Mother asked in a panic. I had no idea what she was talking about. Surely Father would have made his way back to camp by now. Even though he liked to drink, that never stopped him from returning to my mother's arms each night. Men were scurrying everywhere, calling out to each other as they searched the riverbank. Several hours later, Father was still missing. We did not know what to do. Tehan was crying, worried about Father. Mother put on a brave face for us, but I could tell from the men's faces that they had little confidence in Father's safety. "He shouldn't have prayed over the river," said a voice. I turned to see the man who had been drinking with Father last night. Some men nodded their heads. Mother was too distracted to notice. The ferry was coming at any moment, and Father was nowhere to be found. Most of our money had been spent arranging this boat to take us safely to a village on the other side of this river several miles upstream. If we missed this boat, we were stuck, and the communists would surely find us. Mother was pacing, distraught, knowing that if Father did not show up, we would have to leave without him. That is what he would expect of us. I rose to my feet, feeling slightly better, wrapped in the warmth of the blanket. I told Mother I had to find a private place in the woods. She told me to make it quick and to cover it up so no one steps on it. I looked at the line of trees and started walking. After a few minutes, I was back in the place I had run through just hours earlier. But now, there was no horror here, just the tranquility of the forest. I kept walking, and I soon found myself back in the clearing where, in the clarity of day, I could see the beauty of the place, nestled in a peaceful mountain valley. The tall grass waved slowly like seaweed. I kept walking to where I had seen him stoop. And there it was, in the middle of the field. Tombstones. Lots of them. I was standing in the center of a makeshift cemetery. And off to the side, I found the ones I knew would be there, 2 unmarked graves. One of them had fresh yellow lilies lying on it. Undisturbed, at peace. Like a beautiful, wilted carcass. My grandfather never found his father. He caught that ferry and traveled for weeks, leaving North Korea with his mother and younger brother. He never saw any of his relatives again. I was always a solitary kid growing up. I lived on the outskirts of the little town where I was raised and never really had any friends. I would hang out with someone here and there, but for the most part, I stuck to myself, even in high school. Because of my voluntary solitude, I found time to invest in hobbies like fishing, hunting, and playing cards. I used to always love a game of spades with my parents and little brother. Though I loved all the hobbies I partook in, hunting was by far my favorite. I would hunt all sorts of critters when they were in season and spend hours tracking them. See, the fun part wasn't just the act of hunting, it was the thrill of outsmarting the animal and claiming victory. The sense of accomplishment was my ultimate reward. Nothing came close to the euphoria of coming home with a fresh kill. Sometimes, I would spend days out in the wilderness, immersed in nature, surrounded by the sounds of the creatures whose lives I was trying to outwit. Due to my love for hunting and fishing, I didn't focus much on schoolwork. I passed all my classes with at least a C and graduated high school, but further education wasn't in my plans. I was convinced hunting was my calling. After high school, I began hunting not just for pleasure, but for work. There was a company near my hometown that made deer jerky and needed hunters to supply meat. Naturally, as a self-proclaimed lover of hunting, I applied for the position. After a week of waiting, I got the job. I started immediately. Grabbing my gear, I headed out to the woods, climbed into my trusty tree stand, and began the long wait. I must have sat there for hours because the sun had started to set. Since it was summer, I knew I still had some time before darkness completely enveloped me. That's when I saw him, a male buck grazing at the horizon. I watched it, mesmerized by its graceful movements. The buck calmly paced the forest floor, occasionally bending over to nibble on grass or berries, before finally arriving at the creek near my stand. The moment I had been waiting for had arrived. The buck stood there, scanning its surroundings, before lowering its head to sip the water. I raised my rifle, aiming carefully just behind its front shoulder. I took a deep breath. Bang! My shot was perfect. It traveled directly through the buck's heart, killing it instantly. My heart swelled with pride. I had won again. All that waiting had paid off. I hurried down the steps of my stand and rushed to the buck. Its eyes were still open. I was relieved to see that it had been a quick, painless death. After dragging the buck home, I called the company, and they sent someone over to pick up my latest kill. I felt prouder than ever as I shut the door behind them, knowing I had found my true calling. A few years passed, and I continued hunting with the same enthusiasm. Eventually, I saved enough money to move to West Virginia, drawn by tales of excellent hunting grounds. I bought an old cabin deep in the woods, not too far from a small town, about a 15 or 20-minute drive. It was perfect for my lifestyle. In town, I made a few friends, but only one ever joined me on hunts, Brian. He was a good guy, close to my age, maybe a few years older. He had a family, a wife, kids, and even a golden retriever. Brian was lucky and a skilled hunter, too. I was glad to have him as my partner. About a week after buying the cabin, I set up my tree stand in the woods. A month later, Brian and I went hunting together for the first time. We spent hours in that stand before a doe appeared. After taking her down, we carried her back to my cabin. By then, I had learned how to make jerky myself. With Brian's help, we skinned the doe and made venison steaks and jerky. It was a great night. Brian and I hunted together maybe once or twice every 2 weeks, but I went out nearly every night. I even found another company about an hour away that needed hunters to supply meat. Naturally, I applied and got the job. Everything seemed to be going well. My work was enjoyable and paid well. Because I was up in that tree stand for so long almost every night, I knew just about every sound in the woods, from elk yells to mountain lion screams to foxes and coyotes. You give me a noise out in those woods, and I could tell you exactly what animal it was and, sometimes, even which gender it was. That's what made this certain night so different. Like usual, I was up in my stand, and I heard a scream. I played it off like it was nothing because it probably was nothing. Except this scream was different. It sounded similar to something I'd heard before, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Brian was with me, and he couldn't figure it out either. Usually, we don't really care about these noises, as it's not exactly our business to worry about every little sound we hear in the woods at night. However, this noise was just wrong. Something was not right with this scream, and after a good 10 minutes of sitting through it and thinking through every animal it could be, Brian and I decided that we would go check it out. After all, we were armed and both good shots, and if it was a mountain lion, we figured it would run away if it heard us coming. We got down from the stand and began our walk toward the direction of the scream. After a minute or two, we could tell we were getting closer because the noise was getting louder. It seemed to almost echo through the trees, and I won't lie when I say it freaked us both out a little. However, we trudged onward, and eventually, after another minute of hiking, we stumbled upon a clearing where we saw what the noise was emanating from. It was a huge elk, standing in the middle of the clearing, just screaming out into the night. We looked at each other, and through the relieved look on Brian's face, I could tell he still shared the same uneasiness that I was feeling. We turned to look at the huge elk, still wailing, and, deciding to let it be, walked all the way back to the stand. After some back and forth, we decided it would be in our best interests to call it a night and just go home. When we hunted at night, Brian usually stayed in the guest room in my cabin, as it was usually late when we got done, 2 or 3 in the morning, and he didn't want to wake his children or wife by coming home. So, he crashed at my place. However, even though we were far away now from the elk, it seemed as though it had followed us and was just as loud as ever. This freaked us both out a little, but we figured if we went to sleep, it would all be over in the morning. So, we did. But it wasn't the ending. When we woke up, the scream had disappeared. We were relieved, and Brian said his goodbye and left for his home. I did my normal routine, went into town, and waited until dusk before going back out into the woods and into my stand. I was still a tad unnerved from last night, but I figured this would help me get my mind off of it, and it did. Until around midnight, when I heard a scream again. This time, however, the scream really sounded wrong. Like, really wrong. I could tell this was not the same scream from last night, but it again was not an animal I could put my finger on. I hoped and prayed it would go away, but it didn't. The screaming persisted and persisted until I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find out what was screaming in the dead of night. I set out in the same direction as last night, expecting the worst to be awaiting me. I trudged and trudged through the underbrush until, finally, I reached the clearing from the night prior, where the scream had reached its peak. What I saw, however, shook me to my core. There was no elk this time, like I had expected. No, there was a figure standing in the middle of the clearing, facing away from me. I froze, unable to comprehend what I was witnessing. This thing was massive, at least 8 feet tall, and I couldn't tell if it was human or something else. I'll admit it, I was terrified. I had never seen something like this before, and I was ready to book it away from there. I didn't want whatever this thing was to see me, though, so I backpedaled as slowly as I could, staring at this thing for as long as it was in view. As soon as it was just on the horizon, it stopped screaming. Again, I froze. Why did it stop? I wondered. I stood there, in the trees, dumbfounded, staring at this 8-foot-tall creature that had just been wailing in the middle of the woods. I realized now what a fatal mistake I had made by not running home as soon as I saw this thing. As I stood there, this thing turned around, and my body was struck with fear. Though I was at least 300 yards away from this thing, it stared directly at me, and I knew it knew I was there. Its yellow eyes pierced daggers into my heart as it got down on all fours and began wailing once more, starting to gallop toward me. I stood there frozen for another moment before booking it. I knew all the shortcuts to my house, and I took them all, knowing I might not have much time left. I sprinted faster than I have ever sprinted, hearing its echoing cries in the distance, its growing intensity only proving I was going too slow. As the sound grew louder than ever, I saw my house. I fumbled with my keys to get to the one that opened my front door, and as I reached the porch, I found it. I unlocked the door and shut it as soon as I reached it. The cries were right outside, and I knew whatever this thing was, it was on my porch, searching for a way to get inside. Terrified, I hid in my freezer, where I hoped the smell of meat and ice would help mask my scent to the being. This is where I've been hiding for the last 2 hours. The creature has now found its way inside my house, and I can hear it moving around upstairs, tracking any signs of me. I am in the basement and in the cooler, so hopefully it won't find me in here. I tried texting Brian to get over to my place, but my messages haven't been going through, and given it's 3 in the morning, I doubt he'd see them anyway. I have no idea if this thing will go away in the morning, but right now, it's my only hope. If it doesn't, then it will find me eventually, and who knows what it will do then. If you're seeing this, please, I'm begging you, heed my advice. If you hear screaming in the middle of the woods at night, do not investigate. A few years ago, I was working as a deckhand on an Alaskan fishing boat. From a young age, my parents instilled in me a strong work ethic. They always said hard work leads to greater returns, so I naturally gravitated toward a career that shared that philosophy. Alaskan fishing added high risk to the equation, and in turn, the rewards were even sweeter. I couldn't imagine doing anything else and planned on working my way up to captain one day. This story takes place during my 5th crabbing season. By then, I knew the ropes, was familiar with the waters, and had witnessed a few deaths firsthand. I thought I was prepared for anything. I was dead wrong. We were a crew of 15, myself included, when the season began. That number would be halved by the time we returned to shore, and I would be left incapable of setting foot anywhere near the ocean ever again. I was sailing on the Seaward Sarah, a vessel that was getting a little long in the tooth, but was known for her reliability. Since she passed her safety inspection earlier that year, I had no concerns as we left port for the cold waters of the North Pacific Ocean. It was exhilarating to be on the sea again, with the fresh salty breeze and water so vast, you couldn't see anything but blue for miles around. Spirits were high, and the excitement of starting off on a new journey was electric. We always held a party on the first and last nights. It was tradition. Even the captain would join in, dancing, singing, and drinking. We noticed the first sign of trouble 2 days into the journey. The Seaward Sarah was listing on her starboard side. It wasn't a dangerous angle, and after consulting the ship's engineer, the captain determined it was safe to proceed farther into the North Pacific Ocean. He planned on balancing her out once we started loading crabs into the cargo decks. We would overfill the port cargo and underfill the starboard. I didn't question the plan. It seemed reasonable, and besides, I was just a deckhand. The captain could spit in my mouth, tell me it was wine, and I'd smile and agree. That's the way it works at sea. I grew more concerned as the voyage went on. The list worsened over the course of the next week. It went from a barely noticeable incline to my calves burning from straining against the pull of gravity towards starboard. That's when the captain started making a lot of calls. I couldn't hear what was going on, but I could see him shouting into the receiver, his face getting redder and angrier as the days wore on. I was told he was cursing everyone from the ship manufacturer to the inspectors and the contractors who'd last done repair work on her hull. I was told it was business as usual. One evening, when most of us were gathered in the dining hall, holding our plates and glasses to keep them from sliding down the table, the captain burst in and announced we were turning around. Our reactions were mixed, with some experiencing relief and others disappointment. No one knew what this meant for our wages or whether the repairs could be done in time to get back at sea before the end of crab season. Me? I was one of the ones relieved by the news. The vast ocean I'd been yearning for months had become progressively more unsettling as the ship tilted. I became keenly aware just how far away I was from dry land, from safety. This place I found freeing suddenly felt like a cage, and I wanted out. I felt the Seaward Sarah turn as I headed back to the crew quarters and used the wall for support. The combination of the sharp turn and the ship's tilt was terrible for my equilibrium. I needed to lay down and let myself adjust. I don't know what would have happened if the storm hadn't hit later that night. Would the Seaward Sarah have limped home safely? Would she have rolled over along the way? I'll never know now because the storm did hit. One that seemed to come out of nowhere, barely being caught by the radar before its waves and rain started pelting the ship with the fury of an angry sea god. The Seaward Sarah groaned in pain as her list worsened even more. Doors flew open, and objects fell and hit me as I staggered up the hall toward the deck. I didn't realize just how bad it had gotten until I felt my feet touch the wall and realized the wall was becoming the floor. I was still inside when I heard the call to abandon ship. I was bruised, groggy, and disoriented. Enough water had gotten in from somewhere that I was also soaked. I felt a pair of hands grab me by the shoulder and usher me forward when I stopped to take a breath. I know at some point I donned a life vest, but I couldn't tell you when or how I got it on. All I remember is the surreal sensation of the world-changing directions inside the ship and the sight of tall waves illuminated by lightning once outside. Thunder drowned out the screams of my shipmates, but I could see them scrambling to launch a lifeboat. I threw myself toward them, but before I could catch a handhold, I felt a wall of ice-cold water drag me into the railing. A second wave, the reaction to its action, reached over the rail and pulled me into the water. The pain was unbearable. Not only had I been tossed around like a rag doll, but the water felt like I'd rolled into a vat of quicksand made of sharp needles. I didn't know which side was up and which was down, but thankfully, the life vest lifted me back to the turbulent surface. The water had gotten into my ears, muffling the sound of the storm, and I tried to flail my arms hoping for rescue, but I couldn't lift them. I couldn't stop treading water long enough. This hell went on for longer than I cared to reflect on. I just know wave after wave pulled me under, but the jacket always brought me back up long enough to catch my breath. When I close my eyes, even years later, I can still feel the unrelenting assault of the waves mingling with the taste of salt on my tongue. I was going to die. I was sure of it, either by not breathing in when I had a chance or by drowning from rainwater in my mouth whenever I screamed. And then, I felt a tug, and my horror amplified tenfold as I imagined being in the jaws of a sea serpent about to pull me into the ocean depths. I thrashed desperately, trying to escape, only to hear Greta's voice chastising me. "Stop that. I'm trying to pull you in." Greta hoisted me onto the lifeboat, and once I was over the edge, I slipped the rest of the way in, landing in wet and bloody water. I could hear orders being shouted at me, but all I could do was curl up and wait, utterly useless. I know the others were preoccupied by something, as they started rowing as hard as they could. In hindsight, I think they were trying to get clear of the whirlpool of the sinking ship. The storm passed almost as quickly as it arrived. The ocean wasn't as quick to calm, but the turbulence lessened to a manageable degree. When I was finally able to, I sat up and took inventory of my surroundings. I found myself in a lifeboat with 7 other crewmates. All that was left of the Seaward Sarah were bubbles rising from the depths of the ocean. Miraculously, there was a second lifeboat paddling toward us, and once we connected, we were overjoyed to find that every single crew member had survived the capsizing. The captain, who was in the other raft, shouted over the water in a deep, booming voice. We sent out a distress call before she went down. "They have our coordinates. It won't be long." I hoped he was right because my hands were trembling from the cold and the quickly depleting adrenaline. We tied the rafts together, took stock of our supplies, food, first aid, and then waited. Now, you would think there'd be cheering when the light appeared on the horizon, that all hands would start to paddle, wave, and celebrate. Instead, there was a sudden and deathly silence as a communal swell of anxiety filtered into us. Haunted expressions crossed the faces of Greta, John, Sarai, and even the captain. The latter was holding the flare gun, but his finger tapped nervously on the trigger. Sometimes, without knowing why, you get a bad feeling. People call it a sixth sense, but I think it's simpler than that. I think it's danger perceived but bypassed by the brain so you can act faster than you can think. Kind of like how you can actively analyze a person's body language to get more information than you'd get from hearing their words alone. But even if you're not trying to, you still subconsciously notice the little signs showing discomfort, anger, or attraction. It's innate. What we think we perceive is only scratching the surface of all the information we truly take in. The brain, our consciousness, focuses on one thing, but our survival instinct notices the other discrepancies. And when it does, it signals danger without telling you why. "It's not moving," Greta whispered. She hit the nail on the head. She connected the dots outlining the proverbial red flag. When she did, a sort of unspoken acknowledgement traveled through the group as one by one, we noticed it too. You see, there were 2 problems with the light. The nearest ship to ours was at least another 5 hours away, probably longer if they hit the same storm we had. The light was perfectly still, staying at the same height and never once bobbing along with the ocean surge. It also wasn't sweeping the ocean, as one does when searching for survivors. You see, it had appeared way too fast, only about a half hour after the storm had passed. It was extremely unlikely that an unknown ship had been in the area. We all try to keep tabs on one another because, in such turbulent waters, knowing where everyone is can mean life or death. Yes, we're technically all competing against one another, but you'd be hard-pressed to find any seaman unwilling to drop everything to save another in a pinch. There's a code of honor we all follow. But suppose this was an unknown vessel responding to our distress call, we still had to contend with the second issue of its unnatural immobility. My stomach contorted, wondering what it meant. This light was fixed on a single point in the near distance. It was glowing, no, pulsating, but it never once moved on any sort of axis like it should if it was searching the water, and it was immune to the push and pull of ocean waves. There's not a ship on Earth that can do that. The only reasonable explanation was that it might be a Coast Guard helicopter hovering perfectly in place and dangerously low. But then again, even if it had been deployed the second the distress call was sent, a rescue chopper couldn't have gotten to us that fast. The light was impossible. The light felt menacing. The light acted like a lure, goading us to come to it. The boom of an explosion snapped me to reality, and it was followed by a crackle up above. The captain had fired off one of the flares. It hung in the air, slowly fizzing in a downward arc. I remember feeling so scared I dug my fingers into the lifeboat. The shot was one thing, but my fear had to do with the light. I was so afraid it would come closer now that it knew for sure where we were. I was more afraid of that light than I have ever been of anything in my entire life. But thankfully, it stayed away. "Row," the captain ordered. No one moved, not even to breathe. "Row, damn it." John reached for the paddle, but Greta grabbed him by the forearm and stopped him, shaking her head. The captain glared at us with bulging eyes. He'd adopted an authoritative stance, but even he wasn't able to suppress his quakes of fear. If one followed logic, he was right. We should head toward the light. And yet, the longer we stared at the unwavering thing, the more it unsettled us. It's funny how something as simple as bobbing up and down could have alleviated our anxiety. But the light didn't do that. Not even once. Faced with a soft mutiny, the captain grumbled and grabbed a paddle of his own. "Fine," he hissed. "I'll go. Any man or woman too cowardly to come can transfer to the coward's raft." He gestured to us. "Anyone with courage, come with me. We need to flag that ship down before it moves on without us." The flare hit the water and spat out a few more dying embers. I was surprised to see a few crewmates get up. John and a couple of others transferred over to the captain's raft. An equal number transferred to the coward's raft. With contempt on his sour, sea-worn face, the captain cut the lines between us and directed his raft toward the searchlight. Even as they rowed off, we pleaded with them not to go. But it was like they'd been infected with bravado. I could hear them chanting in a rhythm, left, right, left, right, until they were a blip on the horizon. 10 minutes after the voices went quiet, at the estimated time the captain's raft would have reached the light, it suddenly blinked out of existence. The captain, John, and the other 5 crewmates on that raft were never seen or heard from again. The raft has never turned up. This, despite being outfitted with an emergency tracker. Planes equipped with the same tech have gone missing as well, so it could be that those trackers aren't worth much, but it still gives me nightmares to think about what would have happened to me if we'd followed the captain. As for us, it took 7 hours, but eventually, we were rescued by the crew of the Rose Shannon. As expected, the storm had delayed rescue attempts. They warmed us up and combed the waters where we'd last seen the captain's raft, abandoning the search only when the Coast Guard arrived and took over. That night, I had nightmares of the light growing closer and closer, and every time its glow was about to hit me, I'd feel a pressure in my head like it was about to explode, and a searing, burning pain on my skin. Then, I'd wake up drenched in sweat. I now work as a trucker, a mercifully landlocked job. I drive through all kinds of creepy locations. I've seen some things on this job, but nothing has ever scared me more than the light I saw that terrible night. I don't know if it's because of the lack of closure around the captain's raft, or if my subconscious saw something that it felt my brain was better off not knowing. I don't know. I don't like to think about it. But now that I've written this, I think I can finally move on, in a way. I still keep in touch with Greta. She's still working out there. Props to her for getting back on that seahorse. She now captains her own vessel. I couldn't be happier for her. But sometimes, when we're catching up, she talks about that night, and she always follows it up by saying another ship's been lost in that same area. I think they're up to 5 now. No survivors, although the final transmission of one of the ships mentioned seeing a light on the horizon. Sailors have come to avoid what they're calling the Alaska Triangle. Part of me wishes I knew conclusively what's happening out there, but I'm mostly glad I'm here on solid ground, far from the light. Living in Australia as a kid is strange. You get all the American and British media, television and books. We watch the same shows, and in a lot of ways, share the same culture. But none of that belongs here in Australia. It all feels out of place. Christmas specials always reminded me of that. It's always snowing on television at Christmas time, and I'm watching kids build snowmen and families wear those tacky pattern jumpers, while I'm melting in the middle of a blistering Australian summer, just trying to stay conscious in the heat. I guess we have a lot of the same urban legends too, the same scary stories and monsters. They travel here one way or another. Serial killer hitchhikers, werewolves, vampires, all that. But they don't really belong in Australia. I don't know if you've ever seen the Australian landscape, but it's nothing like the forests or plains you get in Europe or the States. For a start, we call forested parts here the bush. The name is bloody appropriate too. A eucalyptus forest is hard going for hikers. The undergrowth is thick and scraggly everywhere other than the paths that have been worn by bushwalkers or animals. If you want to go off the path, well, imagine walking through a hedge filled with thorns and barbs. Now add the very high likelihood of spiders, which aren't like the little irritating ones you guys get. Big fat spiders with thick, ropey webs that tangle around your face and neck if you aren't watching. Then there's the risk of snakes, or more dangerous, unseen ledges or cliffs. The whole thing is a huge hassle. Your monsters wouldn't fit in here. It's hard to imagine being chased through the woods by a werewolf when anything bigger than a rabbit has to keep to the paths or find itself tangled up in lantana, but most white kids don't actually learn much about the old Aboriginal stories. The things which live out in the bush, or those big red deserts. I think about that a lot now, particularly after living alone in a place called Blackheath in the Blue Mountains. It's not far from Sydney, the city with the big pretty bridge. My curiosity was nothing more until recently. Recently, things got pretty rough out there on my own. Living alone can really screw with your head. Most nights, I sit out on my deck till late, reading and writing while I have a smoke. I have a floodlight out there, but it draws in too many bugs, especially in summer. We get these things called Christmas beetles when the weather gets warm. They're about the size of your thumbnail, and they're stupid as hell. If you leave a light on at night, they come in scores, bumping into you like drunks at a crowded nightclub. I keep a little citronella candle instead to shoo the mosquitoes, then I turn on a bright spotlight round the other side of the house to lure the beetles away from the back deck. Well, last week on Monday, I was out maybe around 10:30 at night, just doing my usual. Everything was fine until suddenly, the spotlight on the other side of the house goes out. I groaned aloud. I had a spare bulb in the house, but the whole thing was an inconvenience more than anything. Anyway, I went and got the spare bulb, walked around the side of the house to the light, and, well, the bulb wasn't blown. It was gone. unscrewed and nowhere to be seen. Looking around, I heard a weird sort of scraping sound from nearby, like two rocks rubbing together. It started slow and picked up speed, moving fast toward me. I didn't stop to think about it. I just made a beeline for the door and got into the house. Bugger that for a game of soldiers. I locked my door and spent a good 10 minutes just cussing out and turning on every light in the house. I called the cops and told them someone was on my property, but they figured it was probably just some local kids pulling a prank on me. They agreed to send someone out, but they weren't in any hurry. My part of town is pretty quiet. Nothing really happens here. It's lonely. Out of the way. Peaceful. Exactly the kind of place I thought I wanted to live. Well, I was having second thoughts. I can tell you that. I couldn't sleep much even though I was pretty sure the cops wouldn't come till morning. Every time I almost dozed off, I'd hear that scraping stone sound. I told myself it was a stick falling from a tree or an animal. Maybe just shifting boards in the house. But it was definitely stone. Stone rubbing on stone. I peeked out the window a few times to see if I could see anything, but that was pretty fruitless. A couple of times I thought I saw something, like a couple of eyes moving about, but eyes aren't anything out of the ordinary in the bush. Animals, I thought aloud. Just wallabies or something. The cop showed up the next morning about 9 o'clock to ask about the night before. He gave me a good fright when he knocked at the door and woke me up, but I was sure as heck glad to see the sun outside my window. He was a black guy named Cohen. I knew him from around town, and he was a pretty friendly guy, always gave a smile and a hello when I passed him on the street. We checked out the spotlight. The bulb was missing. No footprints or anything weird. No idea where the bulb went. He reckoned it was strange that it wasn't dropped and smashed right under the fitting. Lights like that get really hot. You don't even think about handling them unless they've been turned off for a good while. Not without oven mitts or something on your hands. What kind of teenage vandal carries oven mitts? Anyway, when I got to the sound I heard, the scraping stones, he didn't laugh it off the way I tried to. In fact, he looked pretty serious. "Melange," he said under his breath. "Melange? What the heck is a melange?" I asked. "Old kid story. Black guys have been trying to scare kids and keep them from wandering the bush at night as long as your mom, probably longer," Cohen smiled. "So how does the story go?" I asked, more curious than concerned. "Well, the melange is a tall guy. His skin is hard, like rock. His legs and arms are bandy-like, makes him walk all funny so his knees knock and scrape together when he steps," Cohen explained. He didn't take what he was saying too seriously, though. He was explaining a kid's story. He usually doesn't cause much trouble. Not if you get out of the way when you hear the scrapes. But if you don't, well, he ain't too friendly either. "That all?" I asked, managing to laugh now at what was obviously just a bit of folklore. "Well, that's most of it. Auntie says he's got red eyes that you can always see. Like fire. And he doesn't like bright lights too much." Cohen let out a belly laugh. "Don't reckon you pissed off an old melange with your spotlight, do you?" "Seems less than likely," I said, smiling as I walked Cohen to his car. I said goodbye and waved him off as he drove away. I felt better after talking to someone. Being alone too much really messes with your head, especially if you don't live inside of neighbors. It's pretty easy to feel vulnerable on your own. I spent the rest of the day working from home, got some shopping done, and the rest. I replaced the bulb but decided not to sit outside that night, so I kept it off. The next few days passed mostly the same way, nothing too weird to report. Some nights I thought I heard a scrape. Thought I saw some eyes out there too. Didn't think too much of it though. It's easy to build things up in your head when you've had a fright. Best not to think about it. I stayed inside at night until Saturday, 5 days since the incident with the light. Figured I should stop being such an idiot and make use of my deck again. So that night I was sitting out, about the same time, 10:30, having a smoke and editing some stuff I'd written for a job I took. I fixed the spotlight so that it was on around the corner, keeping the beetles at bay, and I had my little citronella candle to shoo the mosquitoes. I was feeling pretty fine until I heard the bulb smash. The light around the side suddenly went dark. It was quiet for a moment, but then the night erupted with this gravelly scream that sounded like nothing I ever heard. That was no teenager. I turned toward the house and the sound came. The scraping stone. Slow at first, but picking up speed and hurrying fast around the house toward me. I bolted for the back door and pretty much jumped through as I slammed it behind me. I hardly had time to latch it before the handle began to shake and that stone scratching was just outside. It must have been smart because, as soon as it realized the door was locked, it moved to the window. I stood still. It didn't follow me inside last time, but seeing its face stoop down, smiling that lipless, toothy grin, it terrified me. The smug figure smashed the glass and reached in. I grabbed my keys, but by the time I turned to run, it was already halfway in. It was tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, with spindly limbs that folded through the window like a spider. Its skin looked stone-like, but its furious red eyes were all I saw before I bolted. It screamed and swung at me as I ran for the door, bursting into the night and slamming it shut behind me. I was glad I hadn't parked in the garage. Just the thought of opening it made me panic. I jumped into my Nissan Patrol, started the engine, but before I could move, the front door splintered open and the thing came crawling toward me on all fours, its knees clicking like stone.